monetary cost, which includes the risk of a much wider war. I'd like to see more policy papers examine the cost of various suboptimal scenarios so that their numbers can appear on the big charts you see in the chambers of Congress during debates. Second, helping Ukraine defeat a neo-Stalinist Russia should be seen as unfinished business from the Second World War and rooted in the sacrifice of the greatest generation to bring peace to the continent and create the necessary conditions for prosperity. Two fascist states conspired to start the war in September 1939. One was utterly defeated, occupied, and rebuilt, but the other never was. Our alliance of necessity with the Soviet Union obscured the truth about the origins of the war and ensured that Stalin would never be held to account for the Holodomor and the Great Terror. These monstrous crimes were closer then to the start of the war in 1939 than we are now to the start of Russia's current war against Ukraine in 2014. This burying of inconvenient historical truths inflicted a grave wound on the post-war architecture created ostensibly to keep the peace, but which now fails to do so, as if by design. It also hasn't made it any easier for the people of Russia to face their past with the unflinching honesty needed to transcend that past. Given Russia's nuclear deterrent, Moscow will never be occupied like Berlin was. But a defeat in Ukraine holds some possibility of creating more favorable conditions for the societal accounting that is needed to durably mitigate the threat from the Kremlin. Third, the war in Ukraine, while a monumental catastrophe and collective failure of decades of transatlantic security policy, presents an opportunity to mend the frayed normative order that made war more likely. Thanks to the valor of the Ukrainian nation, we all still have a shot at a safer end state than the one that prevailed in the status quo ante of 2013. Ukrainian victory is the best shot we have of repairing and remodeling a security order that was largely built at a time of great political clarity and seriousness by Americans to protect our interests. Standing by and watching Ukraine lose this war will be for the international order, like taking a wrecking ball to an aging and drafting house that we all still live in, and which, despite its age, still provides us with shelter, and then risking new construction built by others at a political moment marked by its relative pettiness and chaos. To walk any further down this dangerous path is to commit national security malpractice. In this Christian season of Lent, which is marked by greater sacrifice, hopefully greater charity, and in Ukraine, unspeakable suffering, let me conclude with St. Paul's exhortation to the Corinthians, as I believe it contains a simple but relevant message for our own polity at this moment and underscores the urgency of our discussions. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Ukrainian victory is still possible, but each of us has a critical role to play to help make this a reality. Thank you.
Would you accept the question?
Absolutely.
Is there anybody in the audience? Yes, and we will have time for one. Let's go ahead.
Okay. How will the defeat of Russia in the Ukrainian-Russian war affect the global balance of power amongst the remaining superpowers? And if in the imminent defeat of Russia, they are saber-rattling with nuclear weapons, what prohibits them from using those weapons against the West?
It's a difficult question, and there's a lot there. I think, let me just, attempt to speak to the saber rattling and the nuclear deterrent, which of course we've heard even, I guess, yesterday or today or whatever the time zone difference is from Putin himself. There's the United States has a tremendous nuclear capacity as well, right? And I think when you look at the peace that, well, the relative peace, again, we have a massive war in Europe at the moment. that's prevailed in Europe, a lot of it gets credited to the NATO alliance. I think the greater share of the credit goes to the nuclear deterrent, the nuclear umbrella, and the redundant nuclear umbrella we have with, of course, the United Kingdom. So, you know, using a nuclear war in this situation, you know, would be suicide. And you know, if Putin and his immediate circle are characterized by anything, it's by their own self-preservation, as we see. And you know, I don't see that as a scenario that ought to continue to deter us as we seek to deter them.
Unless it's very short.
Well, sure. So what is the status and prospect for U.S. funding for additional aid?
Boy, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. It's something that you know, political leaderships on both sides of the political leaders on both sides of the aisle in the chamber, as you see from the headlines, are working very hard on. I really wouldn't hazard a prediction. You know, there's a lot there, and it, you know, sort of involves complicated procedural maneuverings in either chamber on how to get this done in the midst of, you know, we're headed deeper and deeper into peak political silly season. And so, yeah, I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter. Thank you all.
Walter, what here? Can I make a comment?
Oh, yeah, yes.
So I just want to put a note in on the nuclear deterrent, if I could, because I've looked at this pretty closely, and the fact is, Putin believes that nuclear weapons are useful, and he does believe that he has a nuclear deterrent, and he believes that he also has nuclear superiority. In the annals of the KGB, the Cuban Missile Crisis was lost by Russia because of American nuclear superiority. The track record of Russian nuclear developments bears this out. And so when we stopped working on our nuclear deterrent in the 1980s, Russia didn't. So Putin talks about his nuclear torpedo, his hypersonics. Now he's talking about a space weapon. That space weapon may already be there. And he believes he's deterring us. If we don't believe that, that's good. But the administration obviously does believe it. And we're in a new era. We have to figure out how to deal with this. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you. Thank you, General. Thank you. Well, then, we are about to begin the process of our 6 sessions. The first, I'm honored just to call the names out. I'm going to call the moderator, Ambassador William Taylor, to the podium or to the table. I would also ask General Ben Hodges. General, and Luke, I think I saw you somewhere. You were trying to sneak out and then come in. Yeah, please. And we've got online General Oleksandr, Lieutenant General Oleksandr Pavliuk, who happens to be the commander of the land forces of the Ukrainian armed forces. I think that in my lifetime, I keep looking at each one of these, but I think I'm going to be complimenting every session this way. But this is a session to behold. So with that, I will give it to the capable hands of Ambassador Bill Taylor, who has been our friend from the very beginning. In fact, you were there at the first Quest Roundtable. Yes, you were, as administrator of aid for the newly formed CSIS. It's or the CS. Okay, so thank you, sir.
Walter, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, in particular with these two, and actually three. I think we have General Pavliuk on the screen, or did a minute ago. So we will, I'm sure, welcome him to this. So this first discussion, first panel, assessing Ukraine's land force capabilities and needs. And we have three military people to do that. Four, if I can join you guys.
Army captain right here.
Army captain, Army general.
Army captain.
That's right. And we have other. I also see some other 101st people here, Ben. So this is really important. And we have the general, General Pavliuk, who knows more than any of us about combat. More than any of us about the land capabilities that we're going to talk about here today. I had a conversation with General Pavliuk's previous boss last fall, General Zaluzhny, and he said that, among other very interesting things, he said that the tank is obsolete. He said that the technology that both sides, both the Ukrainians and the Russians have on the battlefield right now, to be able to see on the other side, to get the reconnaissance, identify massing of troops, in particular massing of armored forces, gives both sides the ability to bring fire on those masses, on that formation, on the armored formation. And he says that right now that the tank has lost its real capability to break through. And we see that. We see it on the ground right now, that the breakthroughs, neither side is able to break through. Yes, as Kyle said, the Russians seem to be taking a little bit more on the ground. We could talk later, I'm sure, about what's going on the sea and in the air, but we're going to focus on the ground this time, this part of it. And the question is, how does this go forward? This year, 2024, is going to be a time where we rethink. They think, the Ukrainians think through, and hopefully we're helping think through how they win this war. So I'm going to do this in the order that I've got here. General Pavliuk is the commander of ground forces. He's been fighting the Russians since 2014. He has previous experience that qualifies him for what we're going to do today. I suspect that we're going to be doing this in Ukrainian, General. Is that right? So if we're ready so we're going to do this, right? I do. And General Hodges needs ones as well.
Why do you assume I cannot speak perfect Ukrainian?
Oh, I always assumed you could. If you're interested in the Black Sea, show that.
But you speak already.
Wait, we thought you were putting it on English.
General Pavliuk, can you hear us, and can you lead us off with this conversation?
Включай звук. Так, я чую вас. Ви мене чуєте, розумієте?
Так, ми розуміємо, так.
Hang on one second. Let's be sure we all have this. You want to try it again, General? See if we get everybody's tuned in. General Pavliuk, please go ahead.
Так, все пропало. Доброго дня, шановні присутні. Я вітаю вас з України, з нашої столиці, Києва. Щоденно українські міста і громади потерпають від ракетних та авіаційних ударів. Ворожі обстріли житлових та цивільних об'єктів призводять до загибелі та поранення мирного населення, в тому числі жінок і дітей. А не дивлячись ні на що, Збройні сили України продовжують героїчно стримувати агресора, завдаючи противнику значних втрат. І це стало можливе саме завдяки наданій вами потужній сучасній зброї. Російська Федерація продовжує вести повномасштабну збройну агресію проти нашої держави. Не досягнувши заявлених Кремлем цілей, російська армія веде головні бойові дії на Донбасі, а також щоденно обстрілює мирне населення та об'єкти цивільної структури по всій території держави. На сьогодні на окупованих територіях України Російська Федерація розгорнула угрупування окупаційних військ загальною чисельністю близько 500 тисяч осіб. В подальшому противник буде намагатися розвивати успіх на південно-східному напрямку України. В той час, як на інших напрямках, проводили локальні наступальні дії з метою пошуку слабких місць в нашій обороні. Сили оборони України продовжують вести бойові дії, а також формують стратегічні резерви для проведення контрнаступальних операцій, для звільнення окупованих територій до кордонів України, які визнані міжнародною спільнотою. Водночас ми триває формування в сухопутних військах 10 бригад, а також прийом 4 бригад ТРО з подальшим формуванням механізованої бригади. На сьогодні сухопутні війська України ведуть бойові дії, в ході яких щоденно відбуваються втрати озброєння та військової техніки. Також і зазначити, що засоби ураження радянських зразків озброєння є застарілими та неефективними під час відбиття переважаючих російських сил у порівнянні з наданими західними зразками. Виходячи з зазначеного, забезпечення новітніми та сучасними зразками озброєння сухопутних військ Збройних сил України від країн-партнерів значно зміцнить наші спроможності протистояння противнику. Але подальше затягування термінів надання військово-технічної допомоги України може привести до послідовних труднощів, а саме це дефіцит зброї та боєприпасів, що може дати змогу російським військовим відновити широкомасштабні наступальні дії, відтіснивши наші війська та захопити більше територій. Таким чином, своєчасно нам допомоги в озброєнні та військовій техніці, боєприпасах та обладнанні дасть можливість перейти в контрнаступ та поступово звільнити окуповані території. Щодо наших потреб, на даний час Сили оборони України забезпечуються засоби ураження на критичному військовому рівні. Оборонні операції проводяться з використанням 20-30% від потреби засобів ураження для артилерійських систем та мінометів. Також для створення сільської оборони та доколування основним озброєнням існуючих бригад, це близько 70% комплектованості, нам необхідно уже на даний момент 296 одиниць танків, бойових машин піхоти 1015, БТРів 352, спеціальні броньовані автомобілі 328, РСЗВ системи 102, артилерійських систем 159, мінометів 188. Для проведення наступальних операцій сухопутних військ розрахунку на 30 діб потреба засобу ураження, яку необхідно постійно утримувати на незнижаємому рівні, становить. Я приведу такі основні цифри. Артилерійських систем калібру 155 мм 226 тисяч, 152 мм 235 тисяч, калібр 122 159 тисяч. Та протитанкових ракетних комплексів 24 тисячі. Це такі основні цифри, основних озброєнь. Для формування стратегічних резервів та подальшого ведення наступальних дій існує потреба в документуванні наземних систем озброєння в наступній кількості. Танків 573. В ході ведення бойових дій найкраще себе зарекомендували танки Абрамс, Леопард 2А5А6, БМП 1975. Найкращі це типи Бредлі, Мардер, СВ-90. БТРів 1084, типа Страйкер, ЮПР 765. Спеціальних броньованих автомобілів близько 100, типу Макс Про. РСЗВ 174, артилерійських систем 279, мінометів 456, протитанкових засобів 537. Цінність антиконтрбатарейної боротьби типу анти-ПКЮ складає 104. Також для ведення наступальних дій важливим питанням є забезпечення безпілотним авіаційним комплексом, загальна потреба, який складає розвідувальних безпілотних авіаційних комплексів 3280. Ударних безпілотних комплексів 2784. Для надійного протиповітряного прикриття військ, що наступають, необхідне наступне озброєння. Зенітно-ракетних комплексів 380 одиниць типа Avenger та Кроталь. ПЗРК 2443. Крім того, існує потреба в засобах ближнього бою та розвідки. А саме, станкові гранатомети 721, автоматичні гранатомети 897, протитанкові гранатомети 2558, великокаліберні кулемети 567, снайперські гвинтівки 324, кулемети 7,62 мм різного калібра, різного типу 675, підствольні гранатомети близько 12 тисяч, засоби нічного бачення 11 тисяч. Що стосується проведення ремонтних робіт озброєння і військової техніки, які надані нам партнерами. На даний час основним джерелом повернення в стрій, тобто надходження до військових частин, озброєння та військової техніки, є її відновлення. Насамперед, необхідно знати можливість розгортання ремонтних хабів на території України. Ми готові залучити всі наявні сили та засоби різних форм власності, як для організації самого ремонту, так і для виготовлення запчастин. Для цього у нас є потужності. І нас вкрай необхідно направляти до нас в Україну, а не в інші країни, відповідних фахівців, ремонтників та високотехнічного обладнання та надання документації. Крім того, для організації ремонту в полі бою під час ведення бойових дій та в бойових порядках в них засоби ремонту, технічного вплоту, засоби евакуації. На сьогодні сухопутні війська комбіновано використовують радянську та західну бронетехніку на фронті, аби ці машини доповнювали та підсилювали один одного. На полі бою досить себе добре зарекомендували БМП «Бредлі» з поєднанням з танками «Абрамс». Загалом до складу Збройних сил України передано 31 танк, які успішно виконують бойові завдання в Авдіївському напрямку. Що стосується постачання в якості військової технічної допомоги сучасних вертольотів, то підрозділи армійської авіації сухопутних військ за їх рахунок значно підвищать свої бойові спроможності щодо точності ураження наземних цілей вдень та вночі, в тому числі з різних режимів, на глибину до 5 кілометрів завдяки сучасним прицільно-авіаційним комплексам та керованого ракетного озброєння, а також некерованих авіаційних ракет. Знищення повітряних цілей типу вертоліт завдяки можливості застосувати ракети типу повітря-повітря ближнього радіусу. Знищення малошвидкісних низьколітаючих повітряних цілей завдяки оснащенню вертольотів прицільно-авіаційними комплексами з тепловізійним каналом керованого гарматного озброєння, яке керується нашоломною системою прицілювання льотчиків. Підводячи підсумок, хочу зазначити, що Росія здійснила напад не просто на нашу землю і міста. Вона пішла в наступ проти нашої свободи, проти нашого права жити у вільній своїй країні, самостійно обирати своє власне майбутнє, проти наших національних мрій, точно таких самих, як і у вас, звичайних американців. Якщо ми разом не дамо гідну відсіч російському агресору в Україні, він не зупиниться на досягнутому і піде далі. Зараз, на тяжкий час для нашої держави, я закликаю вас зробити все можливе для того, щоб сухопутні війська Збройних сил України отримали якомога швидше все необхідне озброєння для знищення ворога та звільнення української території. Дякую вам за вашу допомогу і дякую за увагу.
General, thank you very much for both your description of the current situation and the needs that you've outlined, and your final point about all of us in this room and indeed in this city making the point how important the assistance, military assistance and other assistance is to Ukraine in order to defeat the Russians and to have a democratic, viable Ukraine. This is the goal. We're going to come back, General, if it's all right with you to proceed here and have General Hodges and Luke Coffey make their comments, and then we'll have this conversation with you. General Hodges, again, as the Army commander in Europe, and as a careful observer for the past, since 2014, and in particular the last 2 years, giving good advice to mainly NATO and the United States, but also to Ukrainians. Based on what the general just said, on capabilities, both existing and needed, what's your sense looking forward in 2024?
Thanks, Ambassador. Your opening question, you quoted or talked about somebody saying that tanks were obsolete. The only thing that's obsolete are tanks that are full of stupid crew members, or that are tanks that are not properly protected and employed. I don't know. I'm not a tanker, by the way. I'm an infantryman. I love hiding behind tanks. I always wanted protected mobile firepower. Now, maybe it doesn't have to weigh 75 tons, but every commander I know wants a gun that's protected and that can move. And so we don't want to learn the wrong lessons. And I don't think it's an either or, drones or heavy armored vehicles. the best armor units are probably those that are integrating all sorts of drones and other capabilities that enable them to maneuver, fire, and destroy the enemy. And as I listened to the general there, I never heard him say, keep all your tanks, keep your mortars, no, hell no. He gave us a shopping list.
Exactly.
But yeah, and so that's quite an endorsement. I think the year 2024 is, in my mind, is the year of industrial competition. And if Ukraine and the West win this competition, then next year we'll be drinking a toast we should have had this year, by the way. But that's a different part of this. The Russians, I do not believe, had the ability to knock out Ukraine. I mean, they don't have it. The reason there hadn't been a big breakthrough is because they don't have the capability. It's not like 1943 or 44 where there are tens of thousands of troops over the hill or lurking on the other side of the Urals waiting to come into the fight. I think they've got everything that they own is in the fight now, including tanks that are about the average age of this room. You know, to have a breakthrough formation, it's not just about having armored vehicles and lots of people. It's the logistics. I mean, the amount of fuel necessary to exploit a breakthrough is enormous. And then we have a legendary armor officer back there, General Blount, who had to do this in Iraq in 2003. The amount of fuel that's required and ammunition, not to mention the maintenance and all that stuff that's required. And I just don't see the Russians having that, although I certainly could be wrong. I do anticipate that the Ukrainian forces, General Syrskyi this year, is going to have to stabilize the front. We will hear, reports about villages taken, local tactical. Of course we will. But, people talked about Avdiivka like this was Stalingrad. But if you look on a map, Avdiivka is about as far east inside Ukraine as you can get. But when I was at the Munich Security Conference, people were walking around almost in tears. Oh my God, Avdiivka fell. I'm like, well, number one, of course it did, after they killed about a zillion Russians and ran out of ammunition. But then look at the map. And it's not, and there's zero that I can see so far opportunity or potential for the Russians to be able to exploit what they've done. So I think this year we're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff happening. For Ukraine, I try not to talk specific platforms because the platform doesn't matter. What matters is the capability. And so there may be 3, 4, 5 different things that can deliver the capability that's needed for however Ukraine intends to win this war. And I get asked all the time, hey, are you still optimistic? Because I have been accused of being a cheerleader in the past. Yes, I'm optimistic. I've never seen anything worthwhile accomplished by a room full of negative people. It takes, positive energy, positive leadership, and positive American and German support. That's what's missing, is a positive German and American support and a declaration that it is our strategic interest that Ukraine wins. It's in our interest, and therefore it's our policy. And therefore we're going to do everything necessary to help Ukraine win. Then there's no more nonsense about how much fuel an Abrams tank burns, or we don't have enough ATACMS, we need them for some unknown thing, and how long it takes to train an F-16 pilot. It all gets done when that becomes our policy, but we don't have that right now. What do the Ukrainians need? We just heard a long list of things, but the capability that's needed, I believe, is, number one, make Crimea untenable. Make Crimea, that's the decisive terrain of this war. Make Crimea untenable. And the Ukrainians have already proven the concept. With 3 Storm Shadows, the Black Sea Fleet lost their headquarters, their maintenance facility in Sevastopol, and began to reposition with 3 Storm Shadows. Imagine if they had 50 or 100 ATACMS 300-kilometer range or German Taurus, what kind of effect that would happen. I heard General Kavoli a while back say, yes, the Russians have the advantage of mass, but you can defeat mass with precision if you have enough time. And of course, what he's talking about is headquarters, logistics, and artillery. Without those 3 things, you can have 10 million of these Russian meat out there, but they're not effective without artillery support, without logistics, and without a headquarters to direct. And there is nowhere to hide in Ukraine. I mean, you guys all watch the same video I do. There's nowhere to hide. They just got to be able to reach them. And every square meter of Russian occupied Ukraine is within a TACMS range. It's within 300 kilometers. So if Ukraine had the ability to reach that far, there would not be any Russian headquarters, artillery, or logistics sites that would be safe. That's a capability that I think, and there's several different systems that could deliver that. The second thing that I would mention is obviously, and General Zaluzhny laid this out in his famous Economist article, the need for counter drone capability. And as always, ever since the first guy picked up a knife and the other guy picked up a shield, I mean, there is this competition to address or counter a threat. And with TX Helms here, one of the foremost drone experts on the planet, probably can help us out understand where are we on counter drone technology, kinetic, non-kinetic. How can we help Ukraine counter that? So why do I call it the year of industrial competition? Because this is the year when all of us need to find ammo. We need to get maintenance. The thing like John Agolio, my classmate, and I, we grew up learning fix forward. Don't drag stuff back to the rear to fix it. That's the reason mechanics have armored vehicles, so they can get up there and help fix things. So this concept of maintenance, fixing things forward, not bringing things back to Lithuania or Germany or Poland to do repair or over Zoom with a U.S. Army mechanic in Kaiserslautern. But that's what we're doing right now. Ammunition, I think by the end of this year, we are going to be awash in ammunition. There's a lot of ammunition out there, but what I learned a couple of weeks ago is that nations don't want to be transparent about what they have for security reasons, and companies don't want to be transparent about what they have for proprietary reasons. So when you heard President Pavel the other day say, we found 800,000 rounds, like, what, did you look under a tarp? I mean, 800,000 rounds? They're all over the place, but we've got to get accountability. Like the Sergeant Major said, everything good in the Army begins with accountability. And we've got to get it, where is this stuff at? But also, what's the requirement? Logisticians like to talk big numbers. Sir, we delivered 1 million liters of fuel. That's good. I needed 5 million. So what is the requirement? The only metric that matters is this percentage of requirement that's been delivered. And I don't know if we know that yet. Colonel Mucker, when you're over there events in Kyiv as the attaché, I'm sure you will solve that for all of us. I remain optimistic because war is a test of will, and Ukrainian soldiers and people have far superior will to Russian soldiers and people. It's a test of logistics, which we've talked about, but the test of will between the Kremlin and Washington and Berlin, I'm a little bit less optimistic about.
General, thank you very much. Thank you very much. General Pavliuk, we're going to be coming back to you for your comments on what General Hodges just said. So we'll come to you in a minute. Luke. So Luke Coffey, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, formerly of Heritage, formerly in the U.S. military and the Army. Luke, you've given a lot of thought to these questions. Please, I'd love to have some of them.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks, Walter, for inviting me back. I look forward to the invite every year. I'm glad I can always make it, or at least try to make it. The timing is, of course, very important as we mark this month, not only the 2nd anniversary of the large-scale invasion, but the 10th anniversary of the illegal annexation of Crimea. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty, the details, like exact numbers of different types of platforms that are needed, or the level of detail that General Hodges has given. I mean, you don't want to hear a guy who almost 20 years ago left the U.S. Army as a captain lecture everyone about what exactly the Ukrainians need. But I want to talk about their needs in more strategic terms at the higher level. The first need that the Ukrainians have is they need us, the policymakers, the commentators, the supporters of Ukraine, to have an appreciation of the historical significance in which we live. We're going through a period of time where, perhaps my son or my grandchildren will read in the history books and think, damn, a lot of stuff happened in just that short period of time. And how we make the decisions now will determine what they will be reading about how it all turned out in the future. I don't think we understand the historical significance in which we live. I have, said this many times at many different venues, so forgive me if you've heard me repeat this 100 times, but we are living through the continued collapse of the Soviet Union. It didn't collapse in 91. The process started then. And that history has this ability to condense time. And when historians 200 years from now write about the era that was the collapse of the Soviet Union, it will probably define February 2022 as the most consequential, if not maybe even the final moment of that collapse. Everything that's happened since 91, the two Chechen wars, invasion of Georgia in 2008 and the ongoing occupation, the presence in Transnistria, which is now in the news again today, the annexation of Crimea in 2014, the fighting over Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the land border skirmishes between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. These are just a few examples of how the Soviet Union is still collapsing. The process is still playing out. And Ukraine right now is playing probably the most crucial part of this. And I don't think our policymakers and our leaders recognize this. So that's the first thing Ukraine needs is they need us to have an awareness of the historical importance. Secondly, they need us to prepare for a long war. I hear this all the time in Washington about forever wars and endless wars. I absolutely hate this. I hate these terms. Americans are not tired of forever wars. I think this has been a made up inside the Beltway argument. The reality is 99.5% of Americans never served in Iraq or Afghanistan. And 0.04% of the American population were wounded, and 0.004% of America's population was killed in Iraq or Afghanistan. The idea that we as a nation are so fatigued and tired from our 2 decades involvement at varying levels in Iraq and Afghanistan that we can't just provide weapons and support to a country fighting for its very survival. This is nonsense. And this actually doesn't resonate with most Americans when you talk to them. This is an inside the Beltway, if I can be frank, like Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley's my age. We're both from Missouri. I don't remember seeing him in the Great War and Terror. But he's so tired from it. So I just find this very frustrating. The next thing we need to do is learn. We need to learn the right lessons, and Ben mentioned this in the context of the tank. There's fantastic footage out there that we all have seen about the use of and the proliferation of these commercial drones. Some of it is quite horrific. Others is just amazing how, you can take a $100 drone and drop a $25 grenade from 50 feet up down a turret of a Russian tank and destroy a $2 million piece of equipment. But we shouldn't get too fixated on this. This needs to be a big part of the lessons learned and how we think about our support to Ukraine. But we shouldn't forget that at the end of the day, when Mariupol is liberated, it's going to be liberated by a person probably between the ages of 18 and 24 who's going to be tired, hungry, and cold. They're going to be away from their family for months, if not years, and they're not going to have, it's not going to be a drone that's going to liberate Mariupol. The drone will help, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the basic soldiering. So as we talk about billions for this and billions for that and 155 and F-16s and all this other stuff, I really hope this doesn't come at the expense of just the basic training, the soldiering that has to take place for new recruits to keep the ground forces ready to go when the time comes. And then the final bit I want to say, and I'll conclude here. And I just want to say something about NATO, Walter, if I may, because I noticed this, the program is very specific on the different domains, but I want to talk about the NATO summit coming up. Expectations are high, right? Understandably so. Going back to my first point about understanding the historical significance, it is time for our leaders to make history in July of this year. And there is a way to do it. Thanks. There's a way to do it responsibly that is in line with America's national interests. My proposal is that Ukraine is issued an invitation to join NATO with the final date of membership to be determined when all members agree that the security situation in Ukraine is satisfactory. President Zelensky himself has said on multiple occasions he understands Ukraine will not join while there's a large-scale war going on. We have the G7 agreement of security guarantees for Ukraine for the future. The UK-Ukraine bilateral security agreement talks about security guarantees for the future. The Ukrainians have started accession talks with the European Union, and many don't realize this, but there's something called Article 42.7 of the Treaty of the European Union, which is a mutual defense clause inside the European Union. For some countries, this is ignored. For other countries, this is quite controversial, like Ireland and Malta and some of these neutral countries, but it does exist. So my point is, if you can provide accession talks for EU membership, if you can give G7 security guarantees and bilateral security guarantees, then you should be able to extend an invitation. An invitation doesn't mean immediate membership, but it does mean commitment. And the Ukrainians need this, and we need this in July. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you raised the NATO issue as well. The other thing that the summit can do is do what the EU has done. The EU has said, you're going to be a member of the European Union. Let's start the negotiations. And they've done that. And NATO could do the same. They could be, I like your invitation. They could also invite the Ukrainians in pursuit of that to start the negotiation at Brussels, at the NAC, in order to work out the specifics of how Ukrainians integrate in. General Pavliuk, let me come back to you. You've now heard General Hodges and Luke Coffey talking about this coming year, 2024. You have the immediate responsibilities. You also are looking at this next year, the training, the individual soldiers that Luke just said who are going to take back the territory, and in support of these mobile guns that General Hodges talks about. How do you look at the manpower, at the training, at the equipment that is coming in this year? How do you look at this upcoming year, General Pavliuk?
Так, ми впевнені, що в нас вдасться звільнити нашу країну. Дуже важливо, просто необхідно, щоб ми були впевнені, що підтримка буде, тому що ресурсу свого в нас не хватить для того, щоб відновити бригади, які зараз досить таки понесли значні втрати. Ми зараз робимо для того, щоб здійснити перегрупування, вивести бригади і відновити їх, стабілізувати лінію оборони, і в нас це вдається. Противник на всіх основних напрямках зупинений. Сам переходить до оборони, на Авдіївському напрямку ще тяжко, але я думаю, що ми також з цим питанням справимося. Але для того, щоб впевнено дивитися вперед, ми формуємо додатково, я вже назвав 10 бригад, переформуємо 4 бригади. Також ми займаємося відновленням тих, що вже виведені, і створивши відповідне групування, я думаю, що ми зможемо, врахувавши всі проблематику, яку ми мали в минулому році, здійснити поетапне звільнення нашої країни. Але для цього, знов-таки, нам потрібна дуже підтримка від вас. Це всі види озброєння. Да, те, що я чув, БПЛА, вона дуже важлива. Зараз це виходить на новий рівень. Щоб розуміти було по втратам, які зараз несе що одна, що інша сторона, долю знищеної техніки 78%. 70-80% – це втрати від дій ударних безпілотних систем. Але, знову ж таки, вони можуть використовувати тільки в комплексі. Неможливо використовувати одні безпілотні засоби і надіятися на успіх. Це поєднання вогню і артилерії, і повітряної оборони, і броньованих сил, і дій піхоти, і всіх решта сил. Саме велика проблематика в нас – це на даний момент ППО. Ми не можемо ефективно боротися з повітряним противником, так як воно величезна перевага. Да, ми зробили все, щоб удари були максимально неефективні, але все ж таки та кількість літаків, та кількість боєприпасів, які скидаються постійно на наших бійців, це унеможливлює доведення активних дій. Перше, ми повинні паритет повітря. Для цього ми просимо у вас і дальні засоби ППО, і літаки. Вирівнявши стан в повітрі, ми можемо сміло перейти до наступальних дій. Противник, як би не було, також вичерпує свій ресурс. Да, є підтримка в нього таких країн, як Північна Корея, ще ряд, але це не те, що ми надіємося, що нам буде допомагати весь світ. Ми готові. Люди настроєні тільки йти до кінця, бо ми розуміємо, любі перемовини, любе послаблення нашої позиції – це відтягування війни, замороження конфлікту. Любе відтягування війни – це війна знову через декілька років, коли Росія відновить свій потенціал. Тому ми надіємося на вашу підтримку. Нам також дуже важливо ваша позиція щодо вступу в НАТО. Коли Україна в 93-му році віддавала добровільно свій потенціал ядерної зброї, ми надіялися, що світ забезпечить нашу безпеку. На жаль, ми помилялися. Тепер наша надія, що безпека України буде в складі НАТО. Це колективна безпека, на яку ми дуже надіємося, бо ви самі розумієте, мати такого сусіда, як Росія, Україна спокійно не зможе самостійно не будувати своє майбутнє, не розвиватися. Тому це ті складові, які нам потрібні для нашого майбутнього сім'ї вільних народів. І розумійте, щоб зрозуміти, хто така Росія, вона ніколи не зупиниться, якщо в неї буде успіх України. Вся історія Росії – це історія війн на завоювання. По-іншому вона не може существувати. Тому, якщо не зупинити її на Україні, це буде й далі. Будуть інші країни. Це як хижак, який почує кров і буде далі рухатися і рухатися. Тому, я думаю, весь світ зацікавлений, щоб зупинити цього звіра у нас. Щоб ми відкинули і загнали його в клітку, де він буде потихеньку здихати. Тому дякую за надане слово. Я думаю, що я все сказав, що ви очікували.
You did, General. You absolutely did. Thank you. You gave us the rationale and the determination and the stakes. You're exactly right. Let me, as General Hodges is recognized, there's several people in this room who have a lot to offer, who have already offered and have some great questions for the General, for Luke, for General Hodges, and I would love to take your questions now. Who's got the first one? Yes, yes, sir.
Yes. Question is, Russia can indiscriminately attack places in Ukraine, infrastructure, residential areas, other facilities with impunity. Why is there a hesitancy to give Ukraine long-range tactical weapons systems that will reach into Russia and attack their infrastructure facilities, such as weapons manufacturing places, wall facilities? Understand that there's some attacks in there with drones and possibly special operations forces. But if they had long distance, say, scalp shadow missiles that will back deep into the country, that would change the attitude of the Russian people, seeing that they are not being attacked, and maybe change the political environment.
And Luke, who wants to take that one?
Yeah,
Luke, go
okay.
ahead.
Is this on? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, from an outside observer, it makes no sense that you would put these sort of restrictions on the weapons provided to Ukraine, because it's, all one, theater. And the idea that Russia can use bases deep inside the Russian Federation to hit civilian targets inside Ukraine, but Ukraine isn't expected to do that in return. I think to like anyone who's, has just the most basic understanding of military science, or perhaps has watched a Hollywood war movie, would think that this doesn't make sense. But nevertheless, these political realities exist, and we, until the political dynamics change, these are the constraints inside which we must work. And I think the Ukrainians have done a great job, although they must be very frustrated. They've done a great job at this. I mean, they repeatedly reassure us and tell us that everything that's hitting targets inside the Russian Federation is manufactured or originates from Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have now a 8-month track record of responsible in the by definition of NATO, but like they've agreed to the terms NATO's provided on weapons like Storm Shadow and Scalp, where we have given them weapons that could reach inside the Russian Federation, but the Ukrainians have not used them for that purpose. They've only used them on a Russian occupied territory. So I think basically what this boils down to is the White House is running out of excuses. Over the summer, the Ukrainians didn't the U.S. wouldn't give them ATACMS because they might use them against the Russian, Federation. And then the British and the French gave them Storm Shadow and Scalp. And then the White House excuse was, well, they don't need ATACMS because they already have this long range capability. It's just not adding up. So I completely agree, I'm sure, with everyone in this room. We need to start giving Ukraine these weapons, and we need to be a little looser with the caveats, because they are the White House in particular is very concerned by this.
But that mindset just prolongs the war even further.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
John Hodges.
Yeah. So I disagree actually with the premise of your question, that if we could only kill some Russians, start making them feel the pain, that then they would revolt against Putin. I don't think that's going to happen in the lifetime of anybody in this room. I think, look, have the Ukrainian population, have they begun to falter or wilt because of this incessant raise? Not at all. It's the opposite. And same thing happened in World War II and everywhere else. So I think there are more than enough targets inside Russian-controlled, Russian-occupied Ukraine that we could provide ATACMS or Taurus all day long, and the Ukrainians could use them against that, which I think would do more to bring about a successful conclusion of the conflict of this war, which would include, of course, Crimea. Now, I am impressed with what Ukraine is able to do with their own systems, putting pressure on the Russian money-making infrastructure, the oil and gas infrastructure. Those are the targets that I think should be getting pounded in every possible way. But I don't think that if we gave them capabilities that they could use 100, 200, 300 kilometers inside Russia, that would do anything that would help achieve success.
General Pavliuk, do you have any thoughts on this question about U.S. weapons giving you the range into Russian territory, Russian Federation territory? Any thoughts on that one way or the other? If you don't, it's not a problem, but you may have some thoughts.
На даний момент те озброєння, яке надається Україні, ми використовуємо по військових об'єктах на території іменно окупованих територій, для того, щоб максимально не допустити знищення наших сил і засобів. Це чиста виключна робота, фахова робота, ви це чудово бачите, цивільні від цього не страждають. І це дуже важливо для нас, тому що в першу чергу нам треба вражати далекобійні засоби противника, вражати резерви противника. Без цього ні про які контрнаступальні дії, ніякий успіх вести мову неможливо. Дякую.
Thank you, General.
Ambassador, Ambassador Taylor.
Where
Ambassador,
is this? Where is this voice? Is this
Uh,
Wes Clark?
yes.
Voice of God.
The voice of God. Is that you, General Clark?
Look, I apologize. I apologize for not being there. I
Pop
really
in.
be there. I wanted to be part of the dialogue, and it's difficult because I couldn't hear everything the general said because there's no translation channel that's been given to us. So, Bill, if you could have or Walter, if you could have the translator speak into a conference line that give us a number that those of us that are online watching can hear the English translation of the Ukrainian speech. Okay. Second, look, I was in Ukraine this past weekend, and I talked to a lot of different people, including General Syrski and the Minister of Defense, but a lot of other people to try to understand better up close. And two things come to mind. First of all, we have to look at where we are with the Ukrainian forces in some context. The context that seems to me most useful is the context in which we rebuilt the American Army after Vietnam. We said doctrine, training, organization, materiel, leadership, and the quality of our soldiers. DTOLMS. General Bono started it in the early 80s. It went on for 17 years under General Sullivan's leadership. Now, Ukraine is right now fully engaged in holding its line, but it's not going to be able to simply take those defensive forces and throw them into a major deliberate attack and penetrate these elaborate Russian defenses. It has to think in terms of exactly what it needs to do this. And so we started with the concept-based requirement system. How do you want to fight? For Ukraine, this would be, I want to penetrate the Russian lines. Then you work backwards from that and you say, okay, what do I need to do this? How do I, what doctrine, what training, what organizations, what materiel, what leadership? And you systematically organize to do that. Took us several years in the United States Army in the 1980s to respond to the understanding of what a Soviet operational maneuver group did and what deep attack, second echelon attack was as it emerged in Soviet doctrine in the 1970s and 80s. We had to respond to that. We built the armed forces to do it. Concept-based requirement system. So when I hear this discussion about weapons, it's this weapon, that weapon, this weapon, that weapon. Okay. Yeah, the United States has failed to give Ukraine the weapons it needs. But more importantly, the United States and its advisors have, in my view, not been responsible in helping to shape the concepts that are required by Ukraine to win in this war. It's not just a matter of tanks, ATACMs, and F-16s. It's a matter of a concept, how you're going to do it, then structure it. Here's an example. In 1942, under pressure from Joseph Stalin, Britain, the United States, and Canada had some forces in Europe, and Stalin said, you must open a Western front. Sure, because the fighting was desperate in Ukraine against the Germans. And so after a couple of months of sputtering around in August, the Allies launched a cross-channel attack at Dieppe. Should have been pretty effective. They had massed air. They had naval firepower. They had 2 brigades of Canadians, and they went after the town of Dieppe, and the battle lasted about 10 hours, at the end of which half of the Canadian forces, 6,000 men, were killed, wounded, or captured. 100 aircraft, British aircraft, had been shot down. 33 landing craft sunk, along with 1 destroyer.
Joe
It
Clark,
was
let me,
Disaster.
yeah. I want to thank you for that intervention. Thank you for those observations and the historical context that Luke talked about. You have given us some of that as well. On the concepts, I'll tell you what, I am very impressed at the Ukrainians' ability to conceptualize what they're doing. And we've given some advice. The Ukrainians have fought this war. General Pavliuk has fought it since 2014. I'm very impressed with their ability to conceptualize this. Let me, if it's all right with you, General, let me open the floor again to the people in the room. And we've got right.
Let General Clark finish.
Right here, right here. There's one question right here. Go ahead.
Yeah, so a little more historical context I was curious about is when we're talking about the tanks and their relevance, what ratio is kind of the acceptable losses now versus, World War II? I forget what the ratio was for Shermans, but there was several Shermans, I think, per German tank were expected to be lost. Has that shifted our expectations? Like artillery bombardments were still really heavy in World War I against the tanks back then. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, is it outdated, or are our expectations of losses mismatched to, I don't know how to phrase that better, but.
Again, General Blount is back there as a former tank commander, but the way you framed that, if I may say, is not a useful way of thinking about the problem. What matters is having overwhelming combat power at the place where you need to have it. That's the job of the commander, is how do you mass effects that may be there, or maybe long-range weapons that come from different. Now, a little bit of what General Clark was alluding to is the concept. What are we trying to do? And that's where you have to start versus, doing the math of how many tanks do we have. Of course, the first imperative of logistics is anticipation. So being able to anticipate how much fuel you're going to need, ammunition, casualties, parts for maintenance, and so on, that is relevant. But I think here, I don't know that if you can use the same sort of comparison of what are mostly Russian tanks that are T-55, T-60s, that level, compared to what Ukrainians are now beginning to employ from the West.
Luke, anything on that? Yeah. Steve Blank.
We don't have a lot of time, but I want to piggyback on what General Clark said. One of the problems we saw last summer was that there were many complaints that the United States was trying, or NATO were trying to get the Ukrainians to fight a NATO-type battle without NATO-type forces or equipment. So again, you have the same problem he talked about of a concept of operations, the same thing General Hodges has talked about the wrong logistics for the operation that needs to be fought. And as a result, that offensive went nowhere, and it had a lot of casualties. We need not only to get the Ukrainians the right weapons, but we also need to work with them better on getting a concept of operations that will succeed and that is tailored to the realities of this front, not to the realities of textbooks.
Thank you, Steve.
Steve, the only problem I have with this, the Ukrainians do not need us to tell them how to fight. I mean, they know the terrain, they know the Russians better than anybody in this room. And so we just need to make sure that we enable them with all the stuff they need so that they can fight their way. We have tried unsuccessfully for decades, since 1945, to make other people with different cultures fight like us, and it has not worked a single time. So in this case, I would rather focus on what do you need. We'll get it there. We'll anticipate what you need and get it there faster.
The reality is that we're still trying to tell them how to fight. And since we have the purse strings, they have to listen. Whether or not they actually do it is a different question. But you're quite right. But the concepts of operations that we've been trying to give them can't work in Ukraine. You can't do a NATO offensive if you don't have air support.
We're agreeing with each other.
In the back.
My question is for Ben, and Ben, this is a hypothetical question, but given that Americans don't think spatially in terms of when they look at Ukraine and other parts of the world, they don't think very much in spatial terms. But if we were to think spatially, that the distance from in cracking the Surovikin line is from here to say Manassas or from here to Baltimore. Okay, that's about 40 kilometers, 40 miles. No, sorry, 40 miles for the Ukrainian forces to reach the Sea of Azov. So if you were in a position of trying to crack the Surovikin line, I mean, and you know that you don't have air power. I mean, how would you conceptually, just hypothetically, try to deal with that issue? Because you don't have far to go to reach the Sea of Azov coast and split the Russian forces in two. So it's not really beyond, it's not beyond far what Ukraine might do, but there's a lot of stuff that have to have. And this gets in probably what Wes was saying about developing the right concepts. So.
I would want to take as long as I needed to destroy Russian headquarters, Russian artillery, Russian logistics, make Crimea untenable, and make sure that every place behind your famous Surovikin line, no Russian commander, no Russian artillery battery commander, no Logi feels safe. I mean, I would just do that as long as necessary before I start trying another one of these, especially if we don't have overwhelming air superiority the way that, the way we would fight to have that. So for me, I know it's not a broken record, but this is as plain as the nose on their face. If they have long range capability, whatever it is, whatever system it is, to eliminate their headquarters and logistics and artillery, I think that's how we're going to, you can do this.
General Pavliuk, the question, I hope you've been hearing the questions. This last one on the focus on the breakthrough, which is not in terms of distance, as Glenn points out, it's not that far. Do you have thoughts about either General Hodges' comment about making it untenable, or how you would go about breaking through the Surovikin line?
Так, зараз сучасна війна міняється. Те, що ми вивчали в свій час, глибокі прориви, використання броньованих кулаків, велика кількість бронетехніки, вже не діє. Великий вплив – це, знову ж таки повторююсь, бойові дрони. Люба техніка, яка з'являється на полі зору і стоїть, не рухається чи рухається на невеликій швидкості, тут же знищується. Тактика зараз міняється від тактики батальйонів, бригад до невеликих груп, які під прикриттям потужного вогню артилерії, під прикриттям бойових дронів, невеликими ривками проривають територію, захоплюють територію, видавлюють противника. Така дія вже проходить на протязі року. Ми вивчаємо всі можливі варіанти, як діяти в таких умовах. У нас вони є, тому що ми повністю аналізуємо поле бою, розуміємо, що потрібно для броньованої техніки, щоб вона рухалась вперед, що потрібно для прориву глибокошифрованої оборони, підготовленої. Це в першу чергу перевага в повітрі. Ми її не маємо. Це в першу чергу перевага в вогневому ураженні. Ми її також не маємо. Це в першу чергу в великих кількостях сил і засобів, як мінімум перевага. Це по американським статутам 1:6, щоб мати успіх на глибокошифрованій підготовленій обороні противника. На жаль, ми теж не маємо. Тому ми шукаємо інші способи. Я не буду широкий загалом розповідати про це. Я думаю, що ви це побачите на полі бою, але знову ж таки це буде можливо при тільки забезпеченні нас тим, що ми просимо, тому що без снарядів, без техніки, без ППО ні про що говорити неможливо, тому що вже зараз противник просто закатує наші позиції управляємими бомбами, і про яку протидію можна говорити, коли ми не можемо відповідати гідно на те чи інше. Дякуючи вашим системам, ми тільки за 2 тижні вже знищили біля 10 літаків, сучасних літаків противника. Це дає величезний ефект. Уже немає бажання у льотчиків точно скидувати, точно бомбити. Тільки йде більшість імітація своїх дій, але все ж таки йде. 500-кілограмова бомба на позицію наших військ дає свій ефект, що позиції повністю знищуються і ми вимушені відступати. Говорю, відповіді точно, як це буде, немає ні в кого. Міняється поле бою, міняються підходи до ведення війни. Ми вивчаємо, готуємося. Я думаю, що ми зробимо все можливе. Але наше прохання до вас одне. Дайте нам сили, засоби, що ми просимо, тоді про щось можна далі говорити. Дякую за увагу.
General, thank you. Luke, Ben, last words.
We need to want Ukraine to win more than we just hope that Russia is going to lose.
I think Ukraine has got to fix their personnel system. There are 2 million women and men of military age in Ukraine, but tens of thousands of them are in Germany, Poland, Romania, Baltic countries, as well as inside Ukraine, not in uniform. So whenever I hear a Ukrainian commander talk about we don't have enough people, we're running out of people, or when the average age is somewhere around 40, early 40s, that's a political problem. That's not the job of General Sirski to fix. That's the job of the political leadership. And I know it's unpopular, changing or lowering the age, but I think it undermines the support of many countries that want to help Ukraine when they can look and see that Ukrainian women and men are not actually stepping forward to serve. And I think they've got to fix the personnel system so that a young man or a young woman says, okay, I know I won't get put in the fight until I'm properly trained, properly equipped, and I'm in a unit that's ready to go fight. And if something happens, I know that my family will be taken care of. These are political decisions that I think are essential to helping Ukraine win this war.
And the final set of political decisions, as Kyle pointed out, as the general has pointed out, as we've all are right here, are in Washington over the next 2 weeks. I mean, Luke, your point about the context, looking back at this time in history, we will, if we make the right decision this week, this month, it can go one way. If we make the wrong decision or it's no decision, we will look back and see this is as a disaster, as a historic disaster. So, but we have the possibility. It could work. I'm hopeful that it actually will. There are enough people in the House of Representatives who are trying to make this work, who are trying to find a way to bring this bill to the floor. And when they do, it'll pass, just like in the Senate. So, General Pavliuk, it's coming. I'm sure it is. Let me thank you all very much for your questions. Let me thank General Hodges, Luke, General Pavliuk for yours. Please join me in thanking them for their work. Thank you very much.
Right now, actually. Yeah, when I come back tonight to keep the peace at home. Good luck. I know. Well, I'm off to Ukraine on Sunday.
I decided I was not going to stand between everybody's coffee break, and we're giving a coffee break for about 2 minutes. I was actually going to ask a question about air support, but I'll do that at a different time. All right. 5 minutes, folks. 5 minutes.
Their line would not change at all. Your comment on okay. So I completely engaged with Russia. I was the Marshall Center for Training and Generation. I think they're good. Nice to meet you. Thanks so much.
I'll be in touch about.
This was like a year ago.
Well, they don't want Russia to lose. There's no doubt about that.
Well, then I'm all on I hate to disappoint you.
In other words, rather than pull out, they try to say we're not really part.
So
They have not acted in a way to ensure the relationship.
Okay. So it was kind of fun for our that's where we met.
Well, we're having our second board meeting. Anyway, you can be an observer. John, what happens if we offer talks about, it starts at 1:45, goes to 4 hours. When do you think you're in? This is the first that I've done. I would be surprised if we didn't have to do it next year or we had 2 people per team and 7 and then we had observers and people over 6. Good crowd, 24, 25 actors.
We met actually at that session.
Yes. If you want to come to that, you're welcome. Just let me know.
Yes. Could I come for a couple of hours?
Sure. All right, I'll just tell me coming.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to. But this is all off the record.
Yeah, absolutely. So once I just show up at lunch.
The 12th.
Yeah, and I might try to send that to prison also. It's tough. I mean, I just wanted that. We got both money to talk.
So if you stick around to the end, if you name he's world's best map. Oh, okay. I work in semi, I'm an engineer in semi. And so, gotcha. Yeah. Right now. We're doing it. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I have two grandsons. I'm not going to do well with it. I'm trying to.
Master Herbst, you're going to be able to hold the line also. We've been trying to be good. All the
I
time
see you're
we
on
do.
time. This is
Yeah, yeah.
very interesting.
I was about to ask a question myself and stuff about close air support, things like helicopters.
Well, I can answer that. We've got all these former generals and military officers who is their right.
I was going to say.
One thing is that despite numerous statements tonight, if we had said
yeah.
Yeah. Despite the reason why shooters, you blame that on the House Republicans.
Right.
And the failure to have SOS.
Right. Got it. Yep. All right, we're going to be assembling because we're already now 5 minutes late, even going on 10 minutes late. We've got people online on the Zoom lines waiting, so. I'd ask everybody to sit down. All right, I'll do my part, which is you've heard the first panel, and I promised you it was one for the ages. Well, guess what? It follows up with a second panel that is equally one for the ages, and I see that Ambassador Herbst is with us already. And the panelists, I think, if Andy's here, Ambassador Admiral Ihor Kabanenko is supposed to be online. Is he online? Yes. And then Glen is here. And then General Wesley Clark, if you can get him online as well. Can you do simultaneously Clark and Kabanenko? On both? Yeah, very good. Yeah, I see Kabanenko, and you have, and General Clark is here too. Okay, so with that, again, in the same way as we had one of the finest of our senior diplomats, Bill Taylor, run the first panel, leaving it in the hands of another one of our great senior diplomats. I mean, I don't know what it was, but America appointed the best. America appointed the best possible diplomatic corps for Ukraine. I mean, the seasoned diplomats that we've had, the Taylors, the Herbsts, the Tefts, are really astounding, and I'm just very happy that Ambassador Herbst agrees to do this every year. Thank you, sir. It's all yours.
Okay, well, why don't we get started? Let's see now. The conversation today is assessing Ukraine's maritime and coastal defense capabilities and needs. And we've got two of the world's greatest experts on the subject. One sitting next to me, Glen Howard, with whom I've worked off and on, actually the last 10 years since the Russian war in Ukraine began. And I think he may know more about the naval situation in the Black Sea than just about anyone in Washington. And so, Glen, we'll start with you, and then hopefully we'll be able to get our military component with us at some point. Oh, wait a minute. Is that, am I seeing Admiral Kabanenko on the screen and General Clark? Yes. Okay. Oh, yes. In that case, Admiral, it's over to you, since you are on the, I shouldn't say on, you're on the ground, or is that at sea, whatever it is. You're in Ukraine, and you know the situation really well. So please, why don't you start?
Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished participants of the US-Ukraine Security Dialogue. First of all, let me express my sincere gratitude to the organizers for the invitation to this very important event, and to all friends of Ukraine for vital support in our fight against the Russian aggressor. Along with your tremendous volunteer assistance for Ukraine, both moral and material, we all hope for a renewed the US aid to cover Ukrainian urgent defense needs. The main today's priorities of military technical assistance to Ukraine are focused on artillery shells, long-range missiles, air defense systems, F-16s, etc. It was mentioned already in the previous panel. All of this weaponry is critically needed in the ongoing war on the ground and the air above. This is beyond doubt. At the same time, let's look at Russia's war against Ukraine from a little bit different strategic perspective. It's well known from the history that the aggressor strives in every possible way to hide the strategic center of gravity in its war of conquest. In this context, widely circulated the Kremlin's narratives about the ground-based dimension of its goals in Ukraine really is a well-known Russian propaganda from my perspective. I agree here with those who view this war as the Moscow armed struggle to get sea supremacy and expand its ability to project naval power. Geography always matters, and Russia, with its geostrategic ambitions, needs a coastline with an extensive system of naval and air bases, logistics maintenance, etc. But as experience evidence, Moscow entire blue water military armada is very vulnerable to Ukrainian asymmetric means. Due to lack of time, I will not list all successes of Ukraine at sea and would only say what most of the Russian Black Sea Fleet loses in warships, both damaged and sunk, were caused by asymmetric Ukraine's assets. Firstly, they pushed the enemy's vastly superior naval forces away from Ukraine's littoral waters, and then, step by step, are consistently killing its naval potential. Let me remind you that several times Russia tried to conduct an amphibious operation near Odessa, but today this is no longer possible, since compared to February 2022, only 5 of the 13 Russian large landing ships remain in service in the Black Sea. This was done without impact of warships and other traditional naval means, as well as naval battles in the classical sense of fight for sea supremacy. In this dimension, the concept of dozen of small cuts, in other words, dozens of mosquito bites, becomes more appropriate. As a matter of fact, Ukraine's achievements at sea deserve the applause of our allies. At the same time, from my perspective, it is debatable, quite widely circulated message what Ukraine, which does not own a navy, sink enemy warships. I don't think Ukraine doesn't own a navy. Perhaps we should rethink Alfred Meechen's statement what the size, standards, and as a consequence, the speed of warships depend on what kind of warship your neighbor is laying. And get used to the idea of so-called mosquito fleet, what includes a wider spectrum of capabilities, but nevertheless asymmetrical in a sense as before. This fleet represented by SOFIs, underwater and aerial drones, submerged gliders, low signature, small size, high-speed combat boats equipped by compact weaponry, naval seals, as well as coastal anti-ship batteries may be an optimal, cost-effective naval solution for continental sea. There are geographic size and weather conditions favor the use of small naval assets. In addition to already mentioned, a shift towards the widespread use of various unmanned systems in maritime domain should be noted. Unmanned naval mosquitoes play an increasingly larger role in conditions there is no sense to send a human being to do something quite dangerous, what a machine can do better, faster, and more cheaply. This is facilitated by commercially available technological advances, cost effectiveness of drone swarms, as well as limited possibilities of countering their attacks by traditional naval means. War is the mother of innovations, and a lot in drones creation story, Ukraine's drones creation story, is to be said for small teams working with low budget and commercial off-the-shelf technology what just get on with it. Ukraine's progress is visible towards improving drones' operational characteristic by using advances of artificial intelligence, primarily in pattern recognition and swarm operations, as well as integration of different types of small drones, close interaction of unmanned and manned operations, etc. Saturating the battlefield with electronic warfare requires electronic warfare resistant payload of drones, as well as reliable encrypted radio retranslation for much longer range of drones use. In GPS denied environment, already done, gravity from unmanned systems to systems with autonomous functions is clear, and in some cases, autonomous naval operations is a nearest future. However, it would be a mistake to think what drones are a new paradigm in naval warfare, as some claim. Drones are not Wunderwaffe. There are different naval means at sea, both offensive and defensive are needed. They are rather a modern development of means of naval warfare and methods of their use, rooted in history. But a new and distinctive aspect of the Ukrainian approach is the use of small sea drones operating under remote control from a significant distance. They use in swarms, so-called wolf packs, and also in combination with other long-arm weapons, as it was near and inside Sevastopol Bay, near Crimean coast, Novorossiysk during the bombing of Kerch Bridge, etc. We should pay tribute to the fact that sea drones demonstrate cost-effectiveness on the enemy's sea lines, interfering with Moscow's ability to carry out the necessary movements of warships, manpower, munition, and goods by sea. It is a good confirmation from America's perspective of Julian Corbett's arguments that they cannot protect our sea lines without attacking the enemy's ones. Thanks to Ukraine's asymmetric measures, northwestern and partially central parts of the Black Sea has turned from Russian total sea denial in 2022 into a sea of mutual denial now, in which Russia has a strict tendency to suffer disproportionate losses in warships. But the dividing lines of this status quo are fluid from my perspective. The enemy does not stand still, and Moscow's intention to change the situation at sea in its favor has not gone away. At least two Russian ways of doing this are visible. The first is to provide layered anti-drone and missile defense in the maritime areas of responsibility of the Sevastopol, Novorossiysk, and Achimchiri naval bases. The second is to push asymmetric threats into the northwestern part of the Black Sea with further littoral sea lines of Ukraine disrupting. It is for this task what the Kremlin is developing its sea drones and warships anti-drone weapon systems. Moscow is already created sea drones called Alfina, Aduvanchik, and others, as well as remote control anti-drone models and related electronic warfare systems. In fact, Russian sea drones will not have the prospect of direct asymmetric superiority of the Ukrainian Navy. Ukraine simply does not have large warships in the Black Sea. But Moscow needs such means to create a threat to our sea lines and ports. With the advent of these drones, the issue of harbor security, in particular reliable physical barriers, sensors, and appropriate weapons to repel sea drones attacks, is on the agenda. With enough number of such assets, the Kremlin may return to its obsession with disrupting Ukraine's littoral sea lines and blockading ports of the Odessa region. Despite the threat of an immediate mirror reaction from Ukraine to such actions aimed at Russia's vital sea express of oil and gas from Novorossiysk, the Kremlin will most likely aggravate the situation at sea, trying to change it in its favor. That is, the escalation of the war at sea is looming ahead. Could Ukraine counter Russia with a traditional strategy based on classical warships such as corvettes or others? More likely no than yes. These rather expensive and not numerous naval assets what Ukraine could receive are more likely to become a prime targets for the enemy than an effective means of waging war at sea. The turning point can only be ensured by the saturation of our naval capabilities with high precision weapons, high speed, low signature, and maneuverable combat platforms, as well as reconnaissance, target designation, and electronic warfare systems, both manned and unmanned. If we accept such interpretation of the lessons of ongoing war at sea, at least two directions of the American assistance look relevant to cover Ukraine's needs at sea. The first is general purpose systems operating as a part of troops in coastal direction. This includes ground-based air defense and missile defense systems, ATACMS, F-16s, long-range cruise missiles, aim to proactively protect our critical coastal infrastructure and littoral sea lines from Russian attacks. The second is spectrum of asymmetric naval strike capabilities, allowing to provide reliable sea control in littoral waters and expand sea denial to the eastern part of the Black Sea. It is about long-range reconnaissance and attack drones, including sea, underwater, and aerial ones, anti-drone electronic warfare, kinetic and non-kinetic convoy and harbor protection system, fast patrol boats, equipped with Hellfire-like missiles, manpads, etc. It is also important to further targeted sanctions against Russia in order to deny Moscow's access to Western controllers and chips what are used in Russian drones and long-range missiles. Russia should not be overestimated, but also underestimated. The Kremlin's resources are significant, and the enemy goes beyond repairing outdated tanks and other weapons to new combat systems as well as non-trivial ones. In these conditions, our preemptive development of cost-effective asymmetric naval capabilities looks appropriate. It gives Ukraine powerful Archimedean leverage to counter the Kremlin's Black Sea strategy and, at the end, to win the war at sea. We have to gain momentum here. This is our chance. Let me end here. Thank you for your attention.
Admiral, thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question for you, but I'll wait until after everyone else has spoken. So, General Clark, over to you.
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge Admiral Kabanenko's brilliant presentation. Thank you, Admiral. I think you've said it beautifully, completely. I want to just step back for a minute and put this in perspective. Vladimir Putin has never given up the Brezhnev doctrine. And with the claim of nuclear superiority, which he reemphasized in his latest warning, he intends to reestablish the Soviet space on the continent of Europe. Ukraine is merely the first to fall. And there's already a special operation underway in Moldova to take Moldova out and pose another threat from the rear to Ukraine and to NATO directly. So we've got to approach Ukraine as Americans and Westerners from the largest perspective. Ukraine has to succeed in its defense. On land, it has to regain its territory. Russia has to be defeated, and we have to succeed in the Black Sea. Ukraine has performed brilliantly in the Black Sea thus far. The use of the small drones, the creation of the anti-ship missiles, the use of special forces to take out coastal radars in Crimea it's superb. But as Admiral Kabanenko recognizes, in war, there are action, reaction, counteraction cycles. And Russia is right now doing everything it can to regain its initiative in the Black Sea. For Russia, control of the littorals in the north, in the Baltics, and in the south, in the Black Sea, are vital national interests. we have to look at the prospect of Russia's 2024-2025 main objectives as being the control of the seacoast in Ukraine, including Odessa. So this means that one of the first requirement for the United States to provide Ukraine is accurate, real-time targeting information. And Ukraine has to supplement this with its own capacity for stealthy, airborne reconnaissance, real-time, that can direct the sea babies to the right targets and preemptively. Real-time targeting intelligence is the first requirement. The United States is still not providing this for legal reasons, and so therefore Ukraine has to come forward for this. Secondly, the United States needs to be providing on an expedited basis the most advanced chips and other technologies that are required and useful in the creation of Ukraine's asymmetric warfare capabilities. We're not doing this. This has to be done because these very same chips are being smuggled in despite sanctions to Russia. Third, the United States has to give Ukraine the capacities to repel a more conventional attack on the sea coast of Ukraine. So this means anti-aircraft has to be, systems have to be put down there. You need air power, you need coastal defense, you need long-range, short-range missiles as well. So you need, as Admiral Kabanenko said, a layered defense. Yes, you must protect the harbors, but you must sustain the pushback of the Russian naval capacity against Russian innovation and counteraction to the successful work in 2023 and 2022. So this is a continuing struggle. I continue to hear people say, well, Russia's already lost, and they always have some reason to say this. They've lost because the West doesn't look to Russia and Putin as a responsible statement. They've lost because the Russian people are not so enthusiastic as they think, and Putin had to kill Navalny. People are always wishing that Russia has lost. But the truth is, this war is dynamic, and it is a matter of, just as Admiral Kabanenko said, it's a matter of action and reaction. Right now, Ukraine has the initiative. It's up to us in the West to give Ukraine the assets it needs, including intelligence, to maintain that initiative and finish the job against the Russian Black Sea Fleet and Russian aspirations in the Black Sea. Thank you.
Wes, thank you. Wonderful. Glenn?
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, Walter. Thank you for thinking of me and having me a chance to appear today. And Ambassador Herbst is a great friend and great moderator, as well as a key person here in Washington, constantly pushing on the Ukraine issue, as well as General Clark. And Admiral Kabanenko is always ahead of his game, very much influenced a lot of my thinking. President Zelensky began the year talking about that in 2024, this would be the year of the Black Sea. And I think, and I wrote about this in an article that's published in The Hill on January 17th. And it's very important because, you know, many people have lost sight of the fact that Ukraine, without a surface fleet, has been able to aerial assets through the Storm Shadow and also through the baby drones, has been able to reduce the Russian Black Sea by 1/3. So they've lost a third of their fleet. And this is certainly an achievement in naval warfare and through use of the Storm Shadows using these cruise missiles. So when we talk about 2024 being the year of the Black Sea, what we've seen so far is that the western coast of Crimea has now steadily pushed the Russian Navy back to the point where the Russian Black Sea Fleet is now staying in port often. It's reducing the number of times at sea, and it's also now been losing port space or berths because it's trying to evacuate and redeploy part of its fleet to Novorossiysk. And so, and that's led them in their own regional strategy to try to discuss and reopen Ochemchiri in Georgia. So at the grand strategic level, Ukraine is using the sea denial capabilities and it's increasingly becoming area denial capabilities. And this is really very, very important in terms of how the Ukrainian strategy for this year is starting to play out when we're talking about stalemate and using words like that, which are chess terms. And you certainly cannot say that there's a stalemate in the war, judging by the ability to push the Russian Black Sea Fleet back. Now, what Ben has talked about earlier on the other panel was this being the year of munitions, the importance, and that hopefully we'll have a supply of munitions coming in. But what we're seeing through the naval warfare aspect is through, as Admiral Kabanenko said, Russia has lost if I understood the term, 5 of 13 Russian landing ships are only available now. So this means that the Russian ability to resupply forces in Crimea is coming by sea. Now, yes, there is the Kerch Strait Bridge, but that bridge has been alternating at certain levels because of Russian fears of sabotage. So the munition trains that are coming across are not, I don't know access to the intelligence, I don't know how often they are, but they're limited because of this Russian fear of another attack on the bridge. So in the realm of grand strategy, the Russians are being forced to supply Crimea increasingly with these landing ships. So if they're losing that capability, then that means the Kerch Strait Bridge becomes more important. Now, in the discussion, what I wrote about on January 17th in the Hill was the real issue. What they need are the Taurus missiles from Germany. HIMARS won't do it. It's my understanding that the Taurus has a warhead that can penetrate a hardened structure and penetrate it with a second charge that enables it to cause a devastation and force the Kerch Strait Bridge to become inoperable. And this is what they need. Now, this has preceded what happened with Herbst and a lot of the HIMARS attacks on the bridges across the Dnipro. So in the realm of grand strategy, this is what we're seeing with the pieces on the chessboard being moved by Ukraine. Because in order to crack the Surovikin line, as Ben pointed out in my question to him today, is that you need to disrupt those supply and attack command and control nodes, but you also have to disrupt their supply. So if the supply can't come through the south to supply their forces defending the Surovikin line through Crimea, then that forces the Russians to shift through supply through the Mariupol area, but that's why they're rebuilding the railroad supply system for Mariupol so that they, in case they're cut off in Crimea, they can switch to that. It's my understanding they still haven't been able to get that railroad system going to supply their forces in the south. So this is why this year is such a critical year, and a part of this has gone from the sea denial aspect to the area denial. Now, what we're seeing now with the two recent attacks, you had February 2nd, you had an attack on Ivanovets, which was a large corvette that was damaged and sank. And then you followed this with the Cesar Sinikov that was destroyed and sank on February 14th. So that was Ukraine's Valentine's Day gift to Putin. Now, what you're seeing here, which is really interesting in naval warfare, is the emergence of what I termed and tweeted about, so I want to own this. It's the emergence of Ukrainian wolf packs. So they're using the Magura 5 drones in swarm attacks. So it's gone not just from 1 or 2 drones attacking a Russian warship to attacking, they used 5 drones in a concentrated attack, which sank the Russian landing ship. Now, this is really, really important because these swarm attacks, the Russian warships don't have the close-in gun support to attack these drones that are attacking at night. And so this is the problem, as you know, the Moskva, when the pictures of the Moskva was sank, you see a lot of the naval guns were pointed up in the air. They weren't pointed down on the ground. And so there was a reaction time for these Russian warships because they don't know quite how to defend themselves against incoming missiles and also against the drones. So this is a transformation, I think, that is occurring in drone warfare. And I would like to point out to you that Kathleen Hicks, I think she's Deputy Secretary of Defense, has ordered the U.S. Navy in Taiwan, defending Taiwan Straits, to start studying swarm tactics using unmanned drones, sea drones. And this is a direct corollary to the defense of Taiwan, lessons learned from Ukraine. So it's a huge transformation, I think, that is occurring, but it's not getting the proper attention that it deserves. Now, as Ukraine tries to keep pushing on one side of Ukraine, the theater of warfare now is shifting to the eastern Black Sea, northeastern part of the Black Sea. The downing of the A-50 was done in Krasnodar. There were three theories on why this happened. One was that they modified an A-200. The other was it was friendly fire. Russians actually shot down their own second version of their own AWACS. And the other version is it was a man pad. Now, there's conflicting theories about why that happened, but the point is that over Russian territory in Krasnodar, a Russian aircraft was destroyed by either an A-200 or a man pad. So if it's a man pad, if you go with that line of thinking, that means the Ukraine Special Forces are now operating inside Krasnodar. And that's a huge game-changing development if that's true. At the same time, if they developed modified A-200 to hit a big, bulky command and control aircraft in the air, then that's also a very important, significant development for Ukraine. So why am I telling you this? Because what's happening in the Eastern theater is affecting the ground game in terms of what happened in Avdiivka. Russians were using a lot of their glide bombs to attack entrenched Ukrainian positions, but because they lost the A-50, now, according to what Budanov said, there's only 6 of the A-50s are left. So to patrol a territory as vast as Russia, I'm talking from all the way from Murmansk, all the way to Vladivostok, down to the Black Sea, they've got 6, and they alternate in pairs. And so one is on the ground resting while one is in the air. So that means there's technically 3 in the air. So they just lost with the second A-50 that went down. They lost an entire trained crew that they're going to have to replace. So the eyes and ears of what Russia is doing in the ground game have been immeasurably set back by the downing of the A-50. So what is happening in the Northwestern Black Sea theater is affecting also the defense and what we're seeing on the ground, because in the last couple of days, there's been a surge of Russian drone flights over the battlefields in Donbass because they've lost a lot of their eyes and ears with this A-50. And that's my understanding from talking to people that here attending this conference. So the Eastern theater, and this year being the Black Sea, I think is steadily, if the Politico article is correct, that came out a couple of weeks ago, that said the Biden administration has put leverage on the Germans to release the Taurus. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but there was this discussion, as according to Politico, that they had. Then if they can get the Taurus, they can take out and do damage to the Kerch Strait Bridge, which weakens the Russian position in Crimea. You weaken position for logistics in Crimea. You also weaken their ability to defend the southern front. So that means cracking the Surovikin line gets a little bit easier. I'm not saying they're there yet, but I'm just saying this is where the theater is going. And this is the situation as we stand with the Black Sea. And Admiral Kabanenko is certainly spot on by talking about the influence. What Ukraine is doing at sea is very Corbettian in the historical legacy of the British naval strategist Sir Julian Corbett, who emphasized the importance of sea lanes of communication and the role for navies and destroying that in concentrated ground warfare. So I'll stop there, but there's a lot of reason to be optimistic for where we're going forward. And I certainly agree with what General Clark said in his first comment earlier today about getting the concepts right. And I certainly hope that we can get more out of General Clark on what that recommendation is. But Admiral Kabanenko was totally spot on with these new developments at sea this year. And this ties in also to the grand strategy of the grain shipments. There's a reason why Erdogan today was talking about resuming the grain shipments, because the Russians want to get leverage again over Ukraine. They've lost their leverage over Ukraine. So by pushing Ukraine's back at sea, they reopened the grain corridor. And if you see the U.S. Embassy in Kiev's tweets, I mean, they're counting the number of ships, grain ships that are leaving Odessa, going down the Danube, also to the Black Sea. So that has played a very important role strategically in pushing the Russians back from Western Crimea and the northwestern Black Sea. It's not over, but the Russians have this greater fear of kind of moving out of Sevastopol and being pushed back into the eastern Black Sea. And that's all being done by a country with virtually no surface navy. So over to you, John.
Okay, Glenn, that was wonderful. I'm going to ask two questions and then turn it over to audience questions. And I think this first question is for you, Admiral, but it may apply to everyone. I was sent an article from a Russian site called RGRU Novosti, or News, saying that Moscow is building or about to start building a railroad that will hug the coast of the Sea of Azov and then head from there farther west. The idea is if Ukrainian forces move farther south and east and begin to be able to deal with the highway, which is the heart of the land bridge to Crimea, there'll be an alternate Russian route. Do you know anything about this? And is this factoring into Ukrainian plans?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's not new plan. It was just announced, even if I remember, even before, large-scale Russian aggression. Why it's needed for Russia? I think because this railway is needed to connect Krasnodar Krai. They have a lot of, and Rostov region. They have a lot of military storages, military armor storages, and so on. And to connect this with Crimea. So this is some kind of reserve, let's say, or additional way, supply chain, supply road to supply Russian troops in this area in Sea of Azov coast, and of course to provide quick delivery, quick deployment of Russian troops from Crimea if they will concentrate there, or from Krasnodar Krai or Rostov region. So railway, it's a great opportunity to deliver quickly a lot of troops, ammunition, equipment, etc., tanks, armored vehicles, and so on. But of course, this is also could be clarified as a target for Ukrainian armed forces, for Ukrainian weapon. But Russia would like. Russia also always they try, the Kremlin also, from my perspective, they are trying to use different opportunities if they lose some troops, as we can see, for example, right now in near Avdiivka or Bakhmut, they lost already a lot of manpower, but they continue their attacks. And also for them it is important to have supply route, nothing more, and of course to connect this supply route with Crimea for more possibility to deliver, for greater possibilities to deliver troops, equipment, and so on. This is from my perspective, and also it's opportunity to connect Mariupol with Sea of Azov, through Sea of Azov deliver, and so on, some kind of different perspectives how to deploy troops and equipment.
Okay, a quick follow-up, and then we'll go to audience questions. Strategically, is this of any significance? Put another way, if Ukraine advances far enough, and if we finally stop being so timid and send you the 300-kilometer ATACMS, would it be any more difficult to destroy this railroad line if it were built, or as opposed to the highway which is currently being used to supply, for example, Melitopol?
Yeah, I think what they from their point of view, they think probably what they can, for example, if ATACMS or other weapon will destroy in some places railway, they think what they can renovate this quite quickly. They have some possibilities for that, and they consider this road as a maneuverable opportunity. So this is not this is possibility not concentrate troops on some point, but just use this railway for delivery, for quick deployment of their troops, Russian troops on important directions. I think so.
Okay, thank you. Wes, do you want to chime in on this or no?
I think Admiral Kabanenko really covered this. Just one point. When I talk to my friends in Ukraine, they underscore the fact that Russia's principal objective in Ukraine is to, it's not to seize Kyiv as the next stage. It's to take this Black Sea coast and cut Ukraine off from the access to the Black Sea. So we really have to be careful in understanding this. There is an action-reaction cycle here that Ukraine understands very well, and it's driven by the electromagnetic spectrum. If they cut us off from the electromagnetic spectrum, break our communications links, whatever, with these drones, we're in trouble. And they know it, and they're working on it. And similarly, we have to cut them off and establish dominance over the electromagnetic spectrum.
Okay, thank you. Question over here.
Yes, Mr. Howard mentioned about.
Please identify yourself.
I'm sorry?
Please identify yourself.
Yes. They can't hear you.
Bogdan Hetmansky, and the question is.
You mentioned, Mr. Howard, the Taurus missile that could penetrate the British bridge by reason. And why can't they use these scalp shadow for that same purpose? The word has a similar, although weight-wise, I'm sure the configuration is just a bit different. And the second part of that question is, those missiles have a range of about 350 miles thereabouts. Would it be possible to somehow put those on a small, fast attack boat and launch it as a seaborne missile, similar to what the U.S. did in World War II with the Pinky boats and attacking the Japanese fleets?
Well, I don't think these would fit on Ben's yacht, so I don't think you can put these on a boat and launch them. But I applaud your system better. Is that the ATACMS don't have the ability to take out something that's the Taurus is a bunker busting weapon with 2 charges that can penetrate and then go deeper. An ATACMS would superficially do damage to the bridge, but the Kerch Strait Bridge is such a reinforced concrete structure that it would take something like the Taurus. That's why the Ukrainians are really want the Taurus. So what the Ukrainians have done with the Storm Shadows is they've increasingly perfected their use and penetrated Russian radar and taken out all the Russian, not all of it, but many of the radars and pantsers in Crimea have been taken out. There's some remaining and still have sufficient air defense. But my point is the Ukrainians have degraded Russian air defense enough to have allowed the Storm Shadows to work effectively and destroy the Minsk sitting in the harbor on the dry dock. So, which has never happened in naval warfare. I mean, a submarine being sunk on land. But your point is a fair one. But the point is that Ukrainian Navy they're deploying and using Mosquito tactics using the drones, but they don't have the Mark 6s and the fast attack boats necessary to do the things you're talking about. Now they have seized the Boyko towers and used that off the coast of Crimea. That I'm referring to the gas rigs. They've used those now as staging points to launch commando raids inside of Crimea. So, but the ability to go further and deeper and to do some of these things that you're talking about, I think the weapon systems that they have now are not sufficient enough to do the damage to Kerch Strait Bridge that they want. So the Kerch Strait Bridge was damaged by sabotage, explosive going off on a train. That's how they destroyed or put it out of operation for about 6 months. So did I answer? I think most of your.
So basically, the Scalp Shadow cannot be used against the bridge, then, is what you're saying?
Yeah, what I'm saying is my understanding in the Scalp and Storm Shadow is they can't do that. And so, but the Taurus could. And the Taurus is really, when I sent out my article, some of my Ukrainian friends, one of Zelensky's advisors, who's a military expert, wrote me back. The only thing he says, we need the Taurus now. So I assume that's what they need. And I'm hoping the U.S. puts pressure on the Germans to release it. But I don't know where we stand now, because there's discussion that the U.S. is also, the Biden administration is also going to give them longer range ATACMS. So I don't know where that stands. Maybe General Clark can comment on that.
On the ATACMS, they're saying they'll give it to them once Congress passes the aid package. So that's another form of stall. If this was a high priority, they understood strategic significance, they'd find a way to get ATACMS to Ukraine now, even with the stalling of the aid package. There are various ways it could be done. It could be done. Okay, next question or questions. Walter.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a different set of questions, more related to something we had as a discussion last night in a different group. And that is the significance of the Black Sea, not just for Ukraine, but the significance of the Black Sea for NATO. There are 3 NATO members on the Black Sea, and there are 2 that were offered in 2008, were offered, that eventually they're going to be in NATO. So if I were doing Ariel Cohen mathematics, I'd say 5-1, we should be having that as a NATO lake. Instead, what we've been facing is a kind of the Russians thinking that it might be the Ruske Ozero.
A shrinking Russian lake.
Yes, a shrinking Russian lake. So is it possible, I mean, can someone address the issue of how NATO will approach this southern flank that it has, and without, if Ukraine loses or gets tapped out, they're going to have a real problem down there in that Black Sea.
Wes, as a former SACUR, do you want to take the first shot at this?
Yeah, I probably would have started it.
It's a great question, but right now NATO is. I don't want to keep pounding on my own government, but my own government is the problem. So we have acceded to the Brezhnev doctrine. We have agreed we will not contest and enter a confrontation with Russia over Ukraine. We've said we'll provide defense, we'll give them some weapons, but we won't cross red lines. Who knows where those red lines came from? I think I know, but it's not public. I think it's disgraceful. I think it's a mistake, but that's our government. So without U.S. government leadership, NATO is not going to be able to effectively do anything about the Black Sea coast. And were Ukraine to fall and the Black Sea coast of Ukraine be occupied by Russia, what would happen is Romania, Bulgaria would probably buy some more land missiles that could strike ships. And they would say that would keep them safe. And it would be a fig leaf of protection. Because if Ukraine falls, the momentum in the Black Sea is going to be a political, strategic, and military momentum that undercuts NATO's security on the southern flank. And a few missiles that are based in Romania and Bulgaria won't be sufficient.
Glenn?
Yeah, my comment would be, and it's also a question for Wes too, is how in the world can the United States write off an entire strategic theater like the Black Sea and just say, okay, hands off, we're not doing anything? I mean, you know, when the was it the MQ-9 that went down that they decided to pull back, became more risk averse, even just for intelligence overflight. So I don't even know. I mean, it's like saying, you know, during the days of the Cold War that you're writing off Iceland and a whole theater in Norway because you don't want to antagonize the Russians. I just, there's not even ability to think strategically about a one specific theater that's just so discouraging to me.
Okay, if that's a question to me, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
At the top.
Well, I'm not for you.
At the top of the United States is the President of the United States. And he's in a fierce election battle against a man who consorts, respects, and basically takes guidance from Vladimir Putin. It's that simple. And he's already been accused by Trump of getting ready to start World War III. So, got to get through this presidential election. I mean, I hate to say that it comes back to American politics, but unfortunately, politics drives strategy. In 1939-40, President Roosevelt was unable to help Britain when it was being bombarded by Nazi Germany. He simply couldn't do it. And the move to put the draft in place in the United States in 1940 of October passed by one vote. We stood by and watched our closest cultural ally be pounded with the London Blitz and did nothing. So, you know, this is a characteristic. Mr. Putin and the people in Moscow, they're students of American history. They know exactly what this is. Beneath that, there are hundreds of us struggling within the constraints of the political guidance that have been given to provide the assistance to Ukraine. And I'm sorry, but that's just the reality. That policy has been set, and below that policy, everybody's trying to push against it as hard as they can. And my heart goes out to the men and women in Ukraine, the families, the soldiers out there. There's so much that has to be done, but it has to be done for now by Ukraine. After the election, let's see what happens.
Okay. Next question. In the back, on the side. Again, please identify yourself. Oops, there was someone else.
Hi there, Brandon Hart. If the bridge is able to be taken out, what kind of dilemma does that create for Russia in terms of supplying Crimea? And if that makes their ships significantly more vulnerable, does that open up a window to take back Crimea?
Admiral, want to give that a shot?
From my perspective, you know, first of all, from my point of view, at least three aspects are important if we are speaking about taking back Crimea, and this is not only about, you know, support of most active our allies. It's what is needed, from my point of view. First, it's of course we need long range weapon to neutralize Russian most important military objects in Crimea. Second is of course supply chain and so on. Second is we need general purpose troops and infantry, marines, and so on for with you know, modern equipment, modern weapon for to liberate the peninsula. And you know, previously, of course, it's a threat. But second, I think it's we need to push Russians using asymmetric assets, push Russian fleet from Crimea to the eastern part of the Black Sea and blockade them in their naval bases and ports and harbors and so on. And in this regard, I'm not sure what this is the nearest perspective. Of course, first we need to liberate our southern territories up to Mariupol, Berdyansk, and so on, because it can create some kind of bridgehead for further actions to deoccupy Crimea. And of course, it's offensive strategy is needed. We need to accumulate resources, not only manpower, but also equipment, weapon, and so on. This is why, particularly right now, the Western support is vital for us, because in this year, probably such offensive operation, they are have a low probability to be launched. For next year, if we are thinking about this during the next year, we should be prepared this year. We should begin this yesterday, and of course, we need for these resources, different resources. This is my answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Okay, standing in the back.
Jurkiw, I have a question regarding the Black Sea Doctrine. We touched on NATO Black Sea Doctrine as well as the Ukrainian states. My question is in regards to the 28th, yesterday, when the Transnistrian breakaway state of Moldova, a separatist part of it, sent its message over to Moscow for protection, something similar that happened before on the 23rd of February in 2022 from the Donbas republics. My question is, if Russia does intervene and put Transnistria under its own protection, how will this affect NATO Black Sea Doctrine, and how will the Ukrainian state react?
Okay, for the Ukrainian reaction, Admiral?
Yeah, I think it was several times, as you mentioned. It was before some, signals, let's say, to Moscow from this is, Russian against Russian fifth column there, or Russian just direct FSB agents there, and so on. But to implement such let's say Russian hybrid strategy in the region, they need to first pass Odessa region and to achieve their troops, to achieve this Transnistria region. It's not possible, not only now, but on a mid-term and long-term perspective, from my perspective. And so this is some kind of psyops, and Russia will continue to do so. Will continue to destabilize situation in Moldova and so on. This is, from my perspective, the aim of this recent, signal, let's say. But of course, in this regard, the West should keep it in mind and also support, as Ukraine doing, to support Moldova in its Western-oriented direction of their way ahead.
One quick comment.
Actually, let me ask you a quick follow-up, then I'll give Glenn a comment. Do you think Russia has the ability to actually intervene militarily right now, given the fact that you've swept them out from the Black Sea in the west and the center?
No, not. For this, they should first of all to carry out amphibious operation in the region, to occupy coastal areas. It's not possible right now, and in the nearest, at least in the nearest future. And of course, they should pass. This is natural barrier, Dnieper River. It's also they don't have enough forces capabilities to do so.
Thank you. Glenn, you want to jump in?
No, just in reaction to what your question is, that in Moldova is part of a larger Russian information offensive campaign going on in Europe. So the threat of nuclear saber rattling Moldova succession is, the Russians are doing this widespread throughout Europe and also against Ukraine right now, and that because they sense that they've got to do something, a sense of urgency. So I would look at Moldova within the context of what they're doing overall as a part of this strategy of threatening nuclear weapons, There's an article in the Financial Times too that was talking about Russians preparing for scenarios for war with China using nuclear weapons. I'm not totally convinced that that was a truthful leak. I do have some doubts about that, but it's just my own.
I think we have time for one at maximum 2 questions. So anyone next?
Sorry, I'm just going to bring up a question that was put on Zoom for you. And it relates to air defense. There was a question from John asking that the Patriot system helps close the skies. It is essential. Will the West in time provide Ukraine with more Patriot systems and provide supply and support for those that Ukraine has? As far as he understood, President Zelensky announced in this person's estimation that 10 Patriot systems would more or less clear the skies of the Russian Air Force.
I'm sorry, you said this question is for me?
This is for everybody.
Everybody. Okay. Yeah, Wes.
The United States certainly can provide more Patriot systems, and there's some discussion about U.S. forces redeploying out of Iraq or Syria, and there are a number of Patriot systems in the Middle East. One of those systems, if we were to redeploy, could go there. But the easiest way to get the Patriot systems is for the United States to go to other countries that are not currently engaged in combat and ask them to donate their Patriot system and get a new Patriot system. The United States has not done that. Beyond Netherlands and Germany, and there are Patriot systems all around the world that we've sold.
You can find in open sources what at least 10 Sukhoi aircraft, modern Sukhoi aircraft, Russian Sukhoi bombers. They are shot down. They have shot down since the beginning of this February 10th. So it's and all of them they are destroyed by Patriot missile systems. So it's a great success, and of course it's evidence what this system is very effective.
Okay, we can take one more question if there is
John,
one to be had.
Wes,
go ahead.
Finger response to what the Admiral said. So the Russians also have an SA-400 system, and so we have to understand the action-reaction cycle of this war, which is why I'm talking about the concept-based requirement system to really think systematically rather than just throwing systems into it. Because when we threw the Excalibur in and the HIMARS, then the Russians bring up GPS jamming, and then they don't work as well, etc. With the F-16s, the SA-400 system is longer range than the Patriot. It can reach well into Ukraine. It's been tested well into Ukraine to see how far it goes in. The Russians have already tested it. So that means a lot of the F-16s, to get up to the front line, they're going to have to be based well out in the western part of Ukraine. They're going to need air-to-air refueling. So there's no magic bullet solutions, including on Patriot.
Okay, that's an excellent way to wrap up. Let's thank our panel for a terrific conversation. Walter, thank you for organizing this.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Walter. Thanks everyone for permitting me to make these comments from Little Rock rather than being with you in a suit in Washington. Thank you.
We'll get you next time, sir. We'll get you next time.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I actually wanted to say we're not going to take a break because we need to keep to the time regime. I promised to give you some more time on lunchtime. And I also am going to make sure that I invite my good friend Celeste Wallander to have all of this taped into the Pentagon next time so she can hear all the wonderful advice that's been given. And in fact, if wonderful advice has been given and counsel has been given on land forces and naval forces, I'm now honored to move on to the next panel, evaluating Ukraine's air and air defense capability needs with Ambassador Kurt Volker and the Honorable Andriy Zahorodnyuk, General Breedlove, and Dr. Phillips O'Brien. They should be on the air. And Zenon, you're here? Yes, so I would ask you, I don't see Kirk here. Or did he? Uh-huh. And can we guarantee that the three that are on Zoom, can we put them on? Right. Okay. And Zenon's here. And how's our Scottish friend?
He's here. I'm waiting for.
Here, fine, I can hear you.
Okay. If I also should have I thought he was in the room, Kurt Volker, so that's why. Okay, he may be held up, and I should be then. Okay, I should have been monitoring that. Actually, and now that Ambassador Herbst, is Steve Blank in? Can you ask Steve? Maybe he'll take over on this panel and stuff, or Bob. Yeah.
General Blount come up.
Oh, yeah, or General Blount. Would you like to moderate?
Up here.
Yeah, because what I need is a moderator at this point. And Bob, would you like to be able to come up and join us? And actually take over on this, because I think you've been at the center, and all of these are your friends of the because this one is absolutely, you've heard it.
Oh, yeah. I just feel better.
No, Bob, here. Yeah, we're asking you to moderate. So evaluating Ukraine's air and air defense capabilities, you just saw a question that was asked from the audience about the Patriots. I think that was a nice segue to this very important question, because I think that the air and air defense capabilities and needs is a primal question in all of this. I think we've heard it in the previous two panels. So Bob, if you would be ready, you see the folks, you know who they are, and maybe you might want to say a couple of words yourselves.
Okay, thank you, Walter. Wasn't expecting this.
Yeah, I'm sure you weren't.
I was thinking about the parking meter out there.
Yeah.
But obviously, air defense is critical. We have asked Ukraine to do an awful lot of things that we would never do without air superiority. And I feel compelled to start with my very good friend who talks about this all the time. General Breedlove, why don't you start us off?
Well, first of all, thank you. Sorry for my picture. I'm going through check refresh, and replacing my computer has put me 2 days behind in my life. So I'm working from my iPad, and hopefully this will work all right today. I want to make just 3 comments to this morning's gathering so far, and I think it's been a superb one, by the way. On the issue of tanks, I think it was well covered, and I agree with my good friend Ben that we need to not learn bad lessons from this war. Tanks as a part of maneuver warfare are always going to be useful, but they have to be useful in ways that they were built to be useful. We saw Russia make huge mistakes in the beginning of this war because they sent tanks into urban areas and forested areas without dismounted escort, and their tanks got hammered. Used correctly, they are great weapons of war, and I think they will be useful into the future. ATACMS. ATACMS is actually, for me, a part of the air picture, because aircraft are magnificent at doing air defense and attack. But when you need something on target right now at range and precisely, you might be better served by an ATACMS than you would trying to generate an aircraft sortie and send it out. And so these ATACMS are extremely important. And it was well said by General Clark, West, my friend, that the use of the ATACMS is that where the problems with the use of the ATACMS we have in this war so far, in my opinion, is completely 100% about U.S. policy. Our senior leaders are deterred. I do not think they really want this capability in the hand of Ukraine, and they have withheld it to this point. And it's important that we understand that first and foremost, the question of ATACMS falls to policy. We certainly have the wherewithal to provide them. And we have a target set, especially in Crimea, that the high explosive unitary warhead long range ATACMS would be a superior weapon for striking pervasively, persistently, and precisely into Crimea. Finally, on the subject of Patriots, the question that the gentleman asked, we didn't really answer. And that is, I think he's asking, is 10 sets of Patriots enough to clear the skies of Russian aircraft? The answer is no. We love the Patriot. It's an incredible capability, but remember, in the grand scheme of things, and especially as it relates to the geographical size of Ukraine, the Patriots are very point defense weapons. And used correctly, they'll do great work in point defense. But 10 Patriots does not guarantee sovereignty of the skies of Ukraine, far from it in the end. Okay, so those are my remarks to what has been said so far along. I don't think it's going to surprise you that an airman, even though I commanded in the joint environment 3 times, an airman would talk about how critical air power is. And to my good friend Bob, he used the term air defense. Air defense, it's bigger than air defense. It's also about air attack. This is what Russia gets wrong often, and other former Soviet air forces get wrong often. Air power is much bigger than defending your airspace. It's about establishing air superiority and then attacking the enemy to support the ground forces. And we need to keep reminded that air power is to inflict damage on the enemy after air superiority is established. I think what's important to remember about this particular conflict is the absence of air power. Many of us, including several in this meeting, before the war started, we advocated that caps might preclude the war. Those that didn't agree with us argued that caps would start the war. Well, we didn't fly caps and the war started. So we'll never know whether we could have precluded this whole war by putting Western cap in Ukraine to be a barrier to the invasion. I think that's something that we should not pass over so lightly in the future. Air power in its absence failed Russia for a long time. Now, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Russia really throwing air power at the problem, but for almost 2 years, Russia proved unable to do suppression of enemy air defenses, unable to establish air superiority over their own troops, and unable to consistently apply air power deeply into Ukraine. They were episodically able to do a lot of that, but their Air Force really failed them. And what we saw is Ukraine, with a smaller, older Air Force and surface air missile set, do a pretty good job of denying Russia the ability to truly use air power the way it is designed for war. In that the first, say, 90% of this war so far. We should not, and some, even of my friends in some organizations I'm a part of, some of my friends have argued that air superiority may not be required in the future. All we need is air deniability. That's another subject for another day, but I think it would be an incredibly, horribly, absolutely wrong lesson to take from this war, and we can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. Air power, opportunity loss. It was mentioned earlier, as Walter was introducing, that I have said more than once, a squadron of A-10s during the time that 40% of the Russian first strike military was stuck in the mud north of Kyiv a squadron of A-10s would have reduced the Russian army capability immensely. Remember the highway of death coming out of Kuwait. That would have been a cakewalk compared to what a Western Air Force with aircraft like the A-10 would have done to the Russian army on the north side of Kyiv. Opportunity lost. Air power would have changed the rest of the war by destroying that army in detail if it had been applied. Maneuver warfare. We recently went through a period where we had some popular journalists blaming Ukraine for not doing maneuver warfare when we had quote unquote taught them how to do it. Well, I think those journalists forget some of the basic facts of war. Modern, especially US maneuver warfare, starts first with air superiority over our troops. Once you establish air superiority over the troops, they have the freedom to maneuver. We have not given Ukraine what is required to establish air superiority over their troops. And so to hold them accountable for not accomplishing maneuver warfare is kind of silly. It indicates a lack of true understanding of what goes on. Think about us going into Desert Storm 1. Think about all those supplies we piled up in the desert. If we had not had air superiority, we could have never done that logistics forward. It would have been decimated. Think about what we did with the air power of America, bigger than the Air Force, and the air power of some of our allies in the coalition. Think about what we did to the super mez in the capital of Iraq. How Baghdad was said to be impenetrable, and it would take hundreds, if not thousands, of airplanes to knock down the super mez. We did it in about 4.5 days, and we lost 3 airplanes to my recollection in doing it. And that then enabled our ground forces to do what they do very best and take on Iraq's army. So modern maneuver warfare starts with air superiority. And then I would just say that the whole system of trenches that we saw Russia establish in southern Ukraine would never have survived Western air power over the top of them. So I'm quickly getting to my close here. I'm asked all the time, what is it that Ukraine needs to establish air power and to begin to strike consistently, or as I say, pervasively, persistently, and precisely into Russian forces? Well, it's not shiny objects. Okay, don't shoot me. I am an F-16 pilot. I flew it for 24 years. The F-16 will make a big difference, but alone, it will only make a good difference. When you plug F-16s into a network of sensors that can see and characterize the threat, and then a system that can command and control and dedicate assets so that we can target and kill the threat. Now you take an F-16 and exponentially increase its capability. So what we need to do is remember that things like the ATACMS for fast strike, things like the F-16 for air defense first, and then projecting air power onto the Russian land forces, these fit best in that system of being able to sense, characterize, command and control, target, and engage. And so we need now to help Ukraine improve an already pretty good network, but to give them the true ability to employ the air power that we hope for them in the future, and we're now building for them in the future. It's bigger than just the airplanes or the ATACMS. And then to close, I would say that as I am taken on multiple times on the Hill and other places, people say, well, what is it we need to give them? And I said, why don't you just look at what we would take to the battlefield? We would take the kit to establish air superiority. We would take things like ATACMS to do prompt strike. And we would take the air power that would establish battlefield air superiority over our troops and then begin to prosecute the enemy in detail and in depth. Okay, thanks for letting me preach a little bit.
Okay, Phil, it's Kurt Volker. I apologize. Phil, give a round of applause for Phil. Apologize for being late. I just got in last night from about 5 days in Ukraine, a couple days in Poland, and had to take care of a few things this morning. And we have a couple of other speakers here who I know Walter has introduced, and Bob McConnell, thank you for stepping in to get us rolling here this morning. I appreciate that. Before we leave you, Phil, I was struck by a couple of things in what you said, and I just wanted to drill in on them for a second. Number one, you said a lot of things like we could have done, but I'm thinking we still can. Right? Was there any? There's no reason not to be doing these things now. And you mentioned the A-10s, and I just want to use that as an example. They are already decommissioned. They are sitting in the desert. They can be provided because they are already excess defense articles. So it shouldn't even be dependent upon the Congress. Am I missing something here?
No, and in fact, Mr. Ambassador Kurt, if you will, I think it's already been said in a couple other places and ways. This is about policy. This is about the intent of our government. You've heard me say it's not popular in DC, but I do not believe our current leadership has an intellectual understanding of how to deal with a defeated Putin or how to deal with a defeated Russia. And therefore, we're reticent to give Ukraine some of these abilities, like I just said, that we would absolutely take to the battlefield if our force was fighting there. And it's bigger than the A-10s. I believe we have a huge tranche of older, high explosive unitary warhead ATACMS that we're going to pay to have decommissioned rather than provide them to Ukraine to shoot. I say save money, give them to Ukraine and let them use them on the battlefield. So, Kurt, I think you're right. It's A-10s, it's ATACMS, it's even 113s I hear are available. So these are things that I think need to be considered.
And I'm not an expert, maybe you know better, Phil, but I would have to think that not only do we have F-16s and A-10s in the desert, we probably got a lot of other airframes as well. And probably helicopters would also be very useful. Yeah, Apaches. I have another question just on the state of what we're seeing. We saw about 10 Russian aircraft shot down in about the past 10 days. Is that a reflection of Russia doing more to try to establish more air superiority, or is it just a greater willingness to take risk because they want to make sure they give Vladimir Putin an election present?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. First of all, I think they are throwing more effort at this problem right now. They see the West retreating in support, specifically the United States retreating in support, and confusion in our capital about future support. I think they are carpe diem, seizing the moment to try to press this forward. But may I just also say that they're losing these aircraft because, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Russia is incapable, in my mind, of doing SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. When we took apart the Supermez in Baghdad, that is the classic example of SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. This is really hard to do. It takes a lot of practice. Keeping pilots proficient and keeping the aircraft ready to do this mission is a hard thing. And I think what we're seeing now is while the Russian Air Force has lots of shiny new airplanes they keep showing us, they are incapable of doing a few of these basic mission sets.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Phil. We have here on the panel General Blount, and I'd like to turn it straight to you to comment a little bit perhaps on what Phil has said.
I'll be glad to follow on. I don't have much to say, but from a ground commander's perspective, I will endorse what he said 100%. You've got to set the conditions for success before we put our soldiers on the ground in enemy harm's way. You've got to establish air superiority. That's just something we wouldn't go in unless we had that. And, the tank is, I love tanks. I've spent 30 years on tanks, and but they are vulnerable to air attack. And so you've got to establish that air superiority. We had it when I commanded 3rd Infantry Division when we went into Iraq and went to Baghdad. And I never lost a tank to one of their enemies. I lost one tank to enemy fire. And and they had the T-72s, we had the M1s. So they a lot of times they would shoot first, but we would always shoot last. And it only took one of our shots. They would shoot, and they would miss, and then they would die. And that happened over and over and over again because our guys were so well trained, and the M1 is a great system. But we had air superiority. We didn't have to worry about the skies. There was a lot of air defense out there. Where our helicopters were always threatened, and we had a lot of helicopters hit. I told my Apache longbow, if you look down and don't see an M1, you're in the wrong place. You're too far forward. I said, because and every time they went forward, they got hit because, we did not control the skies. We had air superiority. They couldn't fly, but they kept us from flying also. So the Apache was vulnerable. A-10 did great. I love that aircraft, and they would come and they would be talking to our company commanders on the ground on the tanks, and would repeatedly get shot at, and some of them got hit, but they continued to fly. It was just a very, very great tank killer. But I agree 100% that you've got to set the conditions, and we shouldn't be moving into an offensive operation unless you've set the conditions properly. And they've got tremendous trench systems that are vulnerable to the Air Force. If we put enough bombs and artillery rounds in there, you can take those systems out and take out their minefields. But you gotta do that before you commit soldiers on the ground.
Very, very clear, very clear. And do we have Professor O'Brien on the screen here? Is that what I see? Yes, excellent. So I wonder, Professor, if you could give us from Scotland your take. How does what we are talking about here sound to you? What is doable from your perspective and thinking about what NATO could do? And then I have a follow-up, and I want to give you a chance just to say what you'd like to say first.
Great. I mean, it's always so much pleasure to come after Phil Breedlove, who knows more about air power than anybody. So I wonder if anything I'm going to say is going to have a great deal of value, but I'll give it my best shot. A few comments on what we've heard so far. When it comes to ATACMS, one of the key things about ATACMS politically within NATO is it means Germany would have no excuse not to send Taurus's. But yeah, there actually has been pressure. No, honestly, the British and the French have given the Storm Shadows and Scalps, and the only thing the Germans can then say we don't need to send Taurus is because the US won't send ATACMS. So basically, Berlin is aligned with Washington on this. But if Washington said, no, we can give Ukraine the range, then Germany has no cover for not sending Tauruses. So I actually see them as quite linked systems politically. They either one of them or none of them go or both of them go. So I think that's one of the arguments for people saying even if ATACMS won't take down the Kerch Bridge, it would come ATACMS with Taurus, and that would provide a great deal of extra range fire for the Ukrainians, particularly around Crimea. So I think that's something to keep in mind. What Phil said about caps, absolutely right. Had we'd given Ukraine more early in the war, it would have made a major difference. The air war is, I think, a little bit different now than it was in 2022, but had the kinds of things that we'd given Ukraine, that we could have given Ukraine earlier, the war would probably be over now. But that was a political choice at the time, and it wasn't given. I'll preface a little bit about what I'm going to say is I think the last month has summarized where we are now in the fixed wing air war in particular. There have been two interesting developments. First, the Russians seem to be doing well, and then actually the Ukrainians have had a very interesting last 2 weeks. It did seem that, say, the first half of February, for the first time that I'd seen, the phrase air superiority had been used and that the Russians had gained it. Episodically, this was not an air superiority that lasted for long periods and over a large area of the battlefield, but at least it did sound like Russia was gaining air superiority over Avdiivka and the area of fighting, and some pretty good analysis showed that to be the case. With that, they did particularly a great deal of damage with the glide bombs. It's interesting to see how that was used. So the air superiority that the Russians gained over Avdiivka, which really you could argue helped force the Ukrainians out. I mean, air superiority matters. Where the Russians gained air superiority, they gained their victory in Avdiivka, because the Ukrainians could not hold coming under attack from the glide bombs in particular, from what I have heard from Ukrainian sources, without running the risk of too high casualties. And the Ukrainians now don't want to suffer the kinds of casualties that would have been required to hold Avdiivka. So we had the Russians showing some kind of air superiority for a while, but then we've had the really quite extraordinary last 10 days, and I'm not quite sure we even understand how extraordinary they've been. I mean, by my own count, the Russians have lost 10 Su-34s, 2 Su-35s, and an A-50 in 10 days in the air war, which has got to be the highest total of fixed-wing aircraft losses of the war so far. And that it's happening 2 years after the war started is itself, I think, worthy of note. I have no idea there's been speculation. We wonder, is this that the Russians are pressing? I wonder also if the Ukrainians have a little extra range somewhere to bring down 12 aircraft and something like the A-50, which was way outside of range of what we expected. The Russians were keeping that aircraft quite far back for the Ukrainians to get it. And the Ukrainians did say they get it. I mean, at one point it was claimed that might have been friendly fire from the Russians. But I think now the Ukrainians are very insistent that they brought it down. I've heard different explanations, as much as they've repurposed S-200s and extended the range on them to whether they have a new system we don't know about. But the Ukrainians have shown some kind of ingenuity to take down that many aircraft in that short a period. And so my guess is there's something new that's happening in the air war, not just the Russians pressing, but a whole bunch of things. But what it summarizes is this war has been Phil sort of took a lot of what I was going to say. It's a struggle overseas, and that was missed. I went back and looked at a lot of the pre-February 24th descriptions of what the air war would be. I think that, by the way, is a really interesting exercise to go look at how people imagined the air war when Russia invaded Ukraine. And actually, it was, you might not be surprised to know, it was imagined to be an overwhelming and fast Russian victory in the air, that Russia would have overwhelming accuracy, range, air superiority capacity, and that Ukraine had no ability to resist it. Now, what is fascinating about that if you go and look at the reasons it was given that Russia would have this extraordinary advantage, what was usually referred to was the fact that they were battle-tested in Syria. So Syria is brought up over and over again as sort of a battle lab for the Russian Air Force, shows how effective the Russian Air Force is, how good its equipment is. Everything goes back to what Syria has shown. But of course, in Syria, the Russians didn't have to do SEAD ever at any time. So they were jumping to the second stage of an air campaign without doing the first stage that the United States Air Force or any other major NATO Air Force would do first. And I think it was, a fundamental misunderstanding of air power that, that by not looking at the fact that the Russians didn't have SEAD at Syria, people missed the fact that Syria was not actually a very good example of what Russia could accomplish. In fact, I would go so far to argue as Syria has turned out to be a negative, because it gave the Russians far greater confidence in their ability than they should have had. That Syria made them think because they can drop bombs on undefended civilians, they have a good air force. But actually, air power is much more advanced than that. And from the February 24th onwards, we have seen an ongoing kind of battle between the range and effectiveness of anti-air systems and fixed-wing aircraft. I mean, that is the battle. And neither side has been able to suppress enough the enemy air defenses to gain air superiority over the battlefield and to be able to do cap or even air interdiction or anything like that, which would require competent SEAD. The Ukrainians have had quite successful long-range episodic attacks. So they take out individual systems quite effectively around Crimea, but that's very different than being able to suppress all systems in an area to be able to exercise air superiority. So that's a really hard thing to do, SEAD, and maybe what this war has shown is, in fact, SEAD is not only the most important thing in an air campaign, but the actually most difficult thing, the most important and difficult that we can do. The Russians have never been able to exercise SEAD, from what we can tell. They don't even fly in a way that they can do it. They can't fly the aircraft coordinated together to one to get illuminated and the other to go in. They don't seem to have that capacity to suppress enemy air defense. How can we help Ukraine? Well, going forward, one, we have to make sure that their air defenses stay up. That it's a question in some cases of missiles now. They're running short from U.S. supplies being cut back. The F-16s, they're not going to be the magic bullet, but they certainly can be very useful if they can be used to extend range. I mean, this is the battle of SEAD versus not SEAD. If you can't suppress an enemy air defense, then you have to stay away from it. You can't get too close. I mean, you can't suppress it, then you're going to have to be able to attack from outside of its range, or only going into the range very quickly. So what we need to do is give Ukraine the ability to extend its own range if it can't impose SEAD. That this can be done with different systems on the F-16. It can also be, by the way, it has to be done in combination with longer range UAVs and ATACMS and Tauruses. What we want to be able to do is provide the Ukrainians the ability to ask so many questions of the Russians in the air that the Russians can't answer them all. The Russians actually do seem to be struggled when they are presented with multiple targets, that they don't have the kind of ability to adjust to lots of different attacks at the same time. So when the Ukrainians have had successes in places like Sevastopol and around Crimea, it's often because they present a range of different UAVs with storm shadows and the like, and the Russians overwhelm. So what we want to do is provide a way to give the Ukrainians air power with a range of systems from UAVs to fixed wings to ATACMS and Taurus. So that's a quick update of where we stand now, I'd say.
Okay, I have a quick question for everybody, just to see what you've heard. I was at the Munich Security Conference, met with a number of American officials and Germans, and then I had a conversation with our ambassador in Kyiv over the weekend, and I think we may be actually at the stage of deciding to provide the ATACMS and Taurus, and people are wisely not talking about it until they're there. Is that your sense, anyone, or am I just engaged in wishful thinking here?
Not exclusive of each other.
Ben Hodges points out that wishful thinking and that happening are not mutually exclusive. But
I've heard the same rumors, but I haven't heard anything official yet, but I've heard the same
Right.
hinting going on.
Okay.
We have had reports of the U.S. administration, and this is so frustrating, leaning towards sending attack arms. And by the way, this is the thing that I'm worried about is Schultz came out, Chancellor Schultz came out categorically the other day and said he still wasn't going to send Taurus. And it would be unlikely to have made such a categorical statement if they were on their way. Now, the Germans have done 360s on things like Leopard 2, so maybe they will change on this. But I think this has got to come from Washington. If this is going to happen, it's got to come from the administration. And if the administration has the courage to do that, I'd be really impressed, because so far they have really lacked it. But I'd like to think that they're changing their mind.
Well, I would like to think that too. The right way to do it, if we were to do it, is to decide and then tell the Germans and get them to decide. And then both of us do it quietly. And then lo and behold, it had an impact, in the field. That would be the right way to do it. So I hope that's what's happening, but it would be contrary to expectations. Ben Hodges from the floor real quick. I'll repeat your question.
Okay, on the Germans, the guy that runs the Kanzler Amt, the top advisor to the Bundeskanzler, said that Schultz is not going to provide Taurus. That Schultz will not provide Taurus. And I agree with Phillips. I mean, they're hiding behind our failure, but Schultz is so concerned about a return of the Trump administration, of a Trump administration, and that Trump will pull the nuclear shield away from Europe, because unlike France and UK, Germany has no nuclear deterrent. And Schultz is terrified. It's unfounded, but he's terrified that if Germany gets into a war with Russia and Trump has already pulled the nuclear shield away, then they're left unprotected. Now you could argue whether or not that's good reasoning, but that's from his guy, their reasoning why Germany does not provide Taurus, despite enormous pressure from other German political parties.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I'd like to bring in Zenovy Wowczuk now, the founder of the Civil Military Innovation Institute. I want to give you the floor first to make a few comments. And then again, from my recent time in Ukraine, I have a couple questions as well.
Thank you. So my discussion points are probably better for the next session, not on air, but with the upcoming supplemental funding, and I'm going to say it like that just because we've got to hope that it comes, and that's something that I'll be up on the Hill tomorrow, like all of us trying to push people to make happen. But for this next set of funds, Ukraine needs a game changer. It needs, they've said, and we know this, innovation when you're going up against the behemoth is what's going to help win you the war. So we have a perfect marriage opportunity here with some of those funds. Not all of it. Again, we need bullets, munitions, of course, but we need to get the innovation, our leading edge capabilities that we have over to Ukraine, as it's the greatest experimentation lab that we will ever have, because we're not sending soldiers over. Stuff that the soldiers can immediately, use. We're working this right now, but my God, to get that type of kit that is a game changer to help them out and also get us that type of feedback. So for our next fight, I mean, it's a perfect marriage, and I'm hoping, we're fighting an uphill battle because we've got developmental technologies and that Ukraine has asked for, and it's become such a difficult thing to get this tech into theater. We've got training set up in Germany at the end of March on EW technology that will give them such a better understanding of the RF environment there on the battlefield, to understand then which frequencies to use for certain tech to actually make sure that the munition of the UAV can go where it needs to go. I mean, that's a game changer capability that we're fighting an uphill battle just to get into their hands over there, and we will get it. I mean, it's, whether I have to, go take this in a suitcase on a commercial flight and somehow get it over there. But we're missing the boat significantly here on this type of technology that the U.S. wants to move forward and the Ukrainians can use. And I mean, this is something that, again, I'm on the Hill as much as I possibly can. We're never going to get this opportunity ever again to be able to have this type of laboratory to do this with. So that's something that, you know, and again, for the air part of it, yeah, some of our, you know, we're looking at a resupply UAV system that would be ideal. Again, we've been talking about resupply UAV systems for such a long time. This is a perfect opportunity to get those into theater and to get the feedback so that we have that in our arsenal moving forward. So that's what I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, I want to pass on some things that I heard in Ukraine recently. After particularly meeting with some special forces guys who have been in very recent fights. And the point that they made to me is that they are innovating and learning on the battlefield very, very quickly. And comment to me was that don't assume, and this is something, you know, Phil, I used your line, just give them what we would do, give them what we would take. And they said, no, don't do that. They said, we have people in, you know, Germany or in Washington who think they know what we need, but they don't. And we actually have made adaptations and innovations. They're the ones who they tell me they're the ones who know the frequencies of the drones and the things that the Russians are using better than we do. And so they're the ones that are taking our equipment and fine tuning it. Another was an example of what's that UAV? It's got a flashy name like Slicer or something like that. It's Switchblade. There you go. They said they got a whole bunch of switchblades, and the guy tried to use them, and it didn't work. It didn't have the electronics and the GPS and the jamming to be effective. And so it created a dangerous situation on the battlefield. So the next time they went out, they got this, and he insisted that they test it before they actually go into battle. And of course, it didn't work. And so he calls up the manufacturer and gives them, you know, the make and the serial number, and they tell him that, oh, that's a civilian version. And so we think, you know, we have to be careful about assuming that because we have so much and money and knowing what we would do, that we actually are on point with what they need. I think there's a lot of rapid innovation going on that we need to do. And so what I took away from this conversation was that we need to have our own people embedded in the Ukrainian fighting forces. And the fact that we prohibit uniformed personnel from being present in Ukraine alongside the Ukrainians means that we are not learning and getting real-time feedback and knowing what we actually ought to be doing. I'm going to pause with that little rant there and see if anybody has a comment on that.
On innovation, we lead the world in that. And just a personal example, when we attacked into Iraq, I was a commander in 2003. I went to the Pentagon after that, but 2 years later, every piece of equipment that a soldier had been changed. I mean, in the time period and 3-year time period is from the boots, socks, underwear, the weapon, the helmet, uniform, everything had been updated and changed and a very quick, and then we did it again. You know, I think we probably had 5 sets of SAPI plates. You know, the technology, every time we would come out with something, 3 months later, an innovator, entrepreneur would come up with something better. And so we'd have to cancel contracts and start. So we've got the technology here, and we've got to learn how to get it into the hands of the soldiers quickly. And like you're saying, that there's a great opportunity here to continue to do that, because we're not pulling the triggers right now, but somebody else is. But we can still put our innovations to work over there.
Great, thank you.
We should not be
I-
surprised.
Go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
Just a very quick note, we should not be surprised about Ukrainian innovation with our kit. A lot of people talk about this war being 2 years old. This war is 10 years old. It never stopped between the first invasions in 14 and now. And in 14, we were giving, after much political pressure, we finally gave Ukraine counter battery or counter mortar radars. And our government was so worried about how Ukraine might use them to target into Russia, we digitally limited the radars. And so we gave them these radars, and we were sure they would mess them up and lose them and so forth. Others were, I wasn't. And what we found out is the Ukrainians learned how to string those radars together and use them in ways we never thought about, and got far more capability out of them than we did. And now we have learned so much from them at Yavriv in the intermediate years that we now have adjusted our manuals, field manuals, to adopt their tactics and techniques and procedures with our radars. So this is something that's been happening for nearly 10 years. And we will learn now, during, and after this war, we will truly learn about small drone warfare from the Ukrainians.
Okay, Professor O'Brien.
To add on that, I think what we've actually seen reinforces this so much with what the Ukrainians have done with Patriots. That everyone was saying, if February 2022, don't give Ukraine Patriots. They won't be able to learn them. They're too advanced. They won't be able to get them into the field before the war will be over. And actually, Ukrainians have used the Patriot as sort of this roving ambush, from what we can tell, moving it up and down the front line in an incredibly dangerous, effective way for the Russians. And it just shows what they can do with very small number of Patriots. I mean, how many batteries do they have now? We're talking just a handful of batteries, but they seem to have one that is just going around the front line and ambushing Russian aircraft that get too close. And that shows the kind of things they're capable of with just a small amount of systems, I would say more creatively than we might have thought how they would be used to begin with. So that's my favorite example of that.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to take questions from the audience, and I see right here from our uniformed services. Thank you for your service.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So my name is Colonel Vince Mucker. I am a Russian Eurasian Foreign Area Officer for the United States Army and the nominee to be the next Army attaché in Kyiv, Ukraine. One of the items within this conflict that has fascinated me is really a math problem. And as a Texas A&M graduate, that should tell you something, because I hate math. The question of a Shahed drone costing $30,000 and an interceptor costing $1.2 million, and the fact that we are on the wrong side of that equation. And as the Army, and I think this is a NATO question, and using the anecdote of Ukraine to extrapolate to the broader continent, as the Army approaches its 2035 modernization goals, which have been escalated to potentially 2030 or even 2028, are we modernizing our way beyond interoperability within the alliance, and in so doing, pricing our way beyond affordability in a theater where we have been the security assistance provider that has provided stability for the alliance for the last generation? And if so, how do we mitigate that concern?
Yeah. Comments from anyone?
Yeah, let me take first shot. And I'm not really going to answer his question, but I want to talk to how we opened the question. And the Colonel brings up a great problem that we're also seeing as we're battling Iran through Iranian proxies in the desert. As long as we are going to shoot the arrow rather than shooting the archer, we're going to be on the wrong side of this cost business. So this goes right back to policy. We spend a lot of money shooting down the arrow when we should be blowing up the archer at the source. And right now we have policies that do not allow Ukraine, as was discussed earlier today, to use Western kit to fire into Russia. So Russia stages logistics just on the other side of the border, and they station all of these capabilities to shoot into Ukraine because they know the West has provided sanctuary just on the other side of the border. So to the Colonel's point, which is a good one, I would just open by saying that a big part of solving the conundrum he presented is completely about policy. When we get a policy that allows us to shoot the Archer, we can put dumb 2,000-pound GPS bombs on these sites and the cost equation flips.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I would add to that, not only shoot the Archer, but shoot the arrow factory, which, or maybe you don't even have to shoot it. Maybe you can go right up to it and blow it up with a little help from some friends in the Middle East. So I think that's something, frankly, we should be talking with Israel about. And there was another question from the audience.
TX analyst from NDU. Professor O'Brien made the point that neither side has been able to attain steady air superiority. And this seems to be, Colonel Bremer and Greco have written about this no man's land in the airspace because of mobile systems. So anyway, we're going to shoot the Archer. U.S. record on hitting mobile systems is pretty bad. In Gulf 1, we were going after those great big Scuds, which are huge missiles that have to be refueled a minimum of 30 minutes on location in an open desert with lots of air power, and we scored 0 times. So why are we trying to advise the Ukrainians fighting in a unique environment that nobody's ever fought in before, that they should do it our way?
Very fair question. Anyone? I'm looking at General Blount, but
Comment.
okay. I do hope, and I think it addresses. Go ahead, Phil.
I'm sorry, Kurt, I'm on a little bit of a lag. I would offer, the question is very fair. I'm not aware that we're pushing the Ukrainians to do it our way, because we haven't given them the kit to do it our way. So I guess I missed that piece, but right now the Russians aren't being very mobile with the sites that are shooting at us because we've given them a policy of sanctuary. They don't feel like they have to move around, and they really aren't on the battlefield as I talk to the commanders over there. So,
yeah.
So I understand the question, and I understand the conundrum. I'm just not sure that it's terribly applicable right now in Ukraine.
Yeah. So I thank you. And I wanted to add a thought or two on top of that as well. One of them is to repeat the point I made earlier. For the Colonel, as you take up your new duties, I hope you're able to make a persuasive case about how some active duty personnel embedded in Ukrainian forces as observers, not participants, but observers, would actually help us give much better advice and much better equipment. The second thing is that what General Breedlove is saying here is we are indeed, as I understand it, as a matter of U.S. policy, telling the Ukrainians do not fire into Russia using any U.S. kit. I think that is putting the line in the wrong place. The line ought to be you should only fire at military targets inside Russia as long as military forces inside Russia are firing at you. So it is a reasonable measure of self-defense. Everything from the UN Charter onward would recognize that is a legitimate thing for the Ukrainians to do, rather than us urging them not to do it because of our caution about escalation. Certainly the Russians are fully aware that they are fighting Ukrainian forces, and so it's not going to be a surprise to them if the Ukrainians fight back. Manufacturing sites, this is what I say, hit the arrow factory as well. And there are manufacturing sites for defense articles that would be legitimate targets. And I would say that manufacturing sites inside Russia, but also manufacturing sites inside Iran should be things that we should be considering. Okay, there was a third question, Steve Blank. And thank you for your article about EDA.
There's more to come. Yesterday, there was a conference at the Hudson Institute. A couple of people in the audience were there with me, and the G4 spoke. And I got to ask him about the Lend-Lease Act. You may remember that we passed a legislation on Lend-Lease for Ukraine 2 years ago. And I asked him, is that law still on the books? And if so, what's being done? And he said, good question. And he couldn't answer it. So I mean, to get back to General Breedlove, something more than policy has to change. There has to be some sort of impulse from the top to kick the mule in the back to clean up the English, so that we will start getting things that we can, like A-10s, which were not in my article, actually, I think, but to the Ukrainians, because they're proven that they are effective and usable, but there is no impulse coming from the White House, and this has nothing to do with Michael Johnson in the House of Representatives.
And, I'm just going to jump on that, Steve. You're exactly right. First off, Lend-Lease was passed in the previous Congress, and it expired on October 31st or October 30th, 2023. But there is nothing that prevents either the administration or a member of the House from reintroducing legislation on Lend-Lease, passing it, and we could be giving Ukraine loans while we figure out what we're going to do on direct military assistance. I suspect the reason that we're not doing that is because we don't want to see Ukraine burdened by debt, and because we'd like to get the military assistance approved the right way through legislation, supplemental appropriations in the House and the Senate. But I think we are at the stage now where we have to be conscious of the urgency and say we can't be waiting. And you could even approve Lend-Lease, and then when we approve new military assistance, pay ourselves back on behalf of the Ukrainians. There have got to be ways that we can speed that up. So there are.
We had a lot of that debt in 1946, 47.
Yes. Yeah, and you could even write it off at the end as well too. But you have Lend-Lease, which should be reauthorized immediately. You have the military assistance package that should be done. You have the ability to provide excess defense articles that are not coming against any kind of supplemental spending authority. And you also have emergency spending authorities within the purview of the Pentagon itself, where the Pentagon and the US could be doing things to assist Ukraine. They would come at our expense, but then we would get appropriations later to pay ourselves back for that. So there are a number of options that are not being pursued. And I think, as Steve just said, I think it would be just a matter of leadership to start putting everything on the table. Before Walter wants to comment, but I just want to look at Professor O'Brien, General Breedlove, anyone here? Okay, Walter.
I'm just going to ask a question because I was troubled whether I should ask it in the land. We didn't have enough time at the time, or ask it with the air. But I just wish that Zenovy had actually joined us, because he was one of the ones that I joked with about this issue, and that is when the Americans were talking about, well, we're not sure we can send our cowboys. He said, well, why don't you send your Indians? And that was the Apaches, the Comanches, and the Blackhawks. I didn't know whether it was supposed to be because it's tactical air support and for land forces, and General Blount probably could talk to this. But is it that because we didn't achieve air superior or air presence with the F-16s, we can't also have helicopters? Is there a reason why we haven't been using what is effectively a brilliant tool we've had throughout, or is the helicopter now been lost in space because it doesn't have air cover? Is that what the problem is, that the F-16 is not there to cover the Apache, which is there to cover your tank forces? Oh yeah, I see General Breedlove. Yes, I can see that you're going to be able to answer that question. Yeah.
Well, let's go General Breedlove and then General Blount.
The general there will have a great answer. I would just like to set the stage for his answer. I mean, I don't talk about air power and just mean F-16s. Air power is Marine, Navy, Army, and Air, and it is a team that accomplishes things. And as I said before, we want to start out in air defense and establishing air superiority, but then we want to turn this machine to the sport of the ground forces, and we want to rain Hades on the enemy's ground forces. And the helicopters could and would be a huge part of that effort. But we do, as the general described earlier, have to set the conditions. You saw what happened to an awful lot of great Russian helicopters when they went screaming into Ukraine, and the small but mighty Ukrainian air defense forces chewed them up pretty good. And that would happen to us if we were to go running into their surface-to-air missile network and we had not prepped the battlefield. So as an airman now, I would say it is my duty to prepare the environment so that all of the elements of air power can be brought to bear to accomplish the destruction of the enemy ground forces.
The longbow was designed to be, for the Cold War, Fulda Gap tank fight. And it is the greatest tank killer on the battlefield. And it's just awesome for that role. It is not a good offensive weapon unless you've got total air superiority. And even then, it's so subject to ground fire that it's vulnerable. So it is a great defensive system. We've let the aviators turn it into an offensive mission sometimes in the deep attack. But it really needs to be considered more as a defensive system. And that's what it was designed for, to fill the gap when you've got 1,000 Russian tanks coming at you, and it could kill them all. But it's not going to go out in front because it is too vulnerable. Even if you have air superiority, it's still vulnerable to ground fire.
There's a philosophical point in this that I'm going to bring out, which is we find ourselves in a position of saying, well, this isn't good for that because you don't have that. And that's the end of the conversation. It's like, why are we not following it? Well, then maybe we should get you both. Maybe we should do this and that, and give you what you need. It's
one more quick comment. Though,
yeah.
I'll be quiet. But the Defense Department has done a very poor job explaining where the dollars are going to go. We ask for billions of dollars.
Yeah.
But where are they going? Well, they're going to build our defense capability in the U.S. Every dollar is spent in the U.S. It's not going, we don't need to be sending billions of defense dollars overseas. They're all being spent in the U.S. to bolster our defense capability, which we have let lapse, since the fall of the Soviet Union. We've cut back. When we went into Iraq, we had one ammunition plant making M16 bullets and 50 cal bullets, had one running an 8-hour shift. And in 2004, the U.S. Army shot more ammunition, small ammunition, than the rest of the world made. I mean, our ammunition consumption went through the roof, and we did not have the capability to sustain that. The industrial base had quit. And so Congress stepped forward and said, what do you need? And I had to go testify 3 or 4 times, and whatever. So we had to go to the ammunition manufacturer and say, okay, we'll give you a 5-year contract. They don't want a contract for 5 million rounds. They want a 5 or 10-year contract because it's going to take an investment on their part and machinery and people to build the capability. And that's what a lot of these Ukrainian dollars are giving us the opportunity now to build up our howitzer ammunition manufacturing capability, to build more, and all those dollars stand. But the American people don't know that. They don't see that. We're not doing a good job explaining that to the people, that these are really dollars that are all staying in the U.S.
That is very true. Yeah, go ahead.
Just one thing to add on that, though, agreed, that needs to be a better campaign. But one of the most disheartening things I read was an article this morning in the Washington Post where they interviewed folks down in Huntsville, telling them that this is, staying here, it's building up the community, or building up the defense industry, it's hiring jobs. And the response from these people was, well, we should really be using that money for the border. I mean, it's just amazing, though,
Right.
kind of some of the brainwashing that's going on. So anyway, but yeah, the campaign to talk about how the jobs that JD Vance in Ohio. I mean, the amount of jobs that's been created in Ohio from this is amazing. Yet that's what.
Yeah, no, all true. We're running out of time. I saw one final question in the back. Very, very quick, please.
Hi, I'm Andrew Fink with Exovera. Last week, Reuters reported that Iran was sending 400 of the ballistic missiles to Russia of the Fateh 110 variety. How do you think this is going to affect the air defense game in Ukraine?
Yeah, good question. Earlier this week, the head of military intelligence in Ukraine, General Budanov, said that no Iranian missiles have yet been delivered, but you know, it could happen. As far as the implications of that go, does anyone want to comment?
Well, I hate to keep jumping on policy, but you know, we forbid Ukraine from using Western kit to fire into Russia. And recently, a very senior voice in the Russian leadership stack said that if Ukraine uses any foreign kit to fire into Russia, it could mean nukes. And so I would just say one more time that we are deterred, and we allow Russia to do things that they forbid us from doing. And it's just another indication of how complicated this war is because of the limitations that we put on Ukraine's ability to fight.
Yeah, I wish we were half as good as the Russians at strategic communication, because because I don't believe they actually mean that, but saying it is very effective. It's having an impact.
It's the Russian concept of reflexive control, and they've exercised it over the administration perfectly. By basically, the administration makes every decision with the Russian mindset of this might cause nuclear war, or weirdly the opposite, it might lead to Russian collapse, and that's a bad thing. But basically, it's been the greatest reflexive control operation I have ever seen.
Agreed. So I'm going to close out with two provocative thoughts. One of them, despite what we hear about money staying in the U.S., going to defense industry, rebuilding defense industrial base, it is still very slow, insufficient, without the timelines attached that the industry is looking for. And I would just remember that we used the Defense Industrial Production Act in 2020 to produce ventilators, but we have not used it to produce what it's meant for, which is ammunition and military goods. We should think about that. The other is that we should get out of the trap of thinking that we can't do certain things. Russia is attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure and cities in Ukraine on a regular basis. And there's no reason that I can think of why we should not be able to have an operation to help protect Ukrainian civilians. You know, just not to attack Russia, not to attack Russian fighter aircraft. Let the Ukrainians do that, but to actually extend air defense coverage as best we can, as far as we can inside Ukraine. Why not? So I'll close off with that, and I guess lunch is probably waiting for us outside.
All right, folks. I would ask, because we've got Senator Duckworth. I would ask that we're heading for lunch. I'm going to give about 20 minutes on the lunch, but please come back. I'm going to ask the folks that come after to shorten it, and then we've got Ambassador Courtney's. I want that full 70 minutes for you.